She set the plate down in front of Zuri like she was feeding a dog. Not with anger, not with any dramatic gesture. Just that calm, practiced indifference, the kind that is worse than hatred, because it says, "You are not even worth the energy of my cruelty." Kang Hai-rin placed yesterday's cold rice, reheated meat with the edges dried out, and wilted vegetables, scraped from old containers in front of her son's wife. Then she turned back to the table, where the rest of the family sat with steaming, freshly prepared dishes, and she smiled at someone else's joke, like nothing had happened. Like Zuri wasn't sitting right there. Like Zuri wasn't a person at all. And the worst part? Everyone at that table let her. If that were you sitting at that table, in that house, surrounded by people who were supposed to be your family, what would you have done? How many nights could you swallow that kind of humiliation before something inside you finally broke? Before we go any further, if stories like this move you, stories about dignity, about what people endure behind closed doors, and about what happens when the truth finally walks through the front door, please subscribe to this channel right now. Hit that like button and drop your city or country in the comments below, because I want to see exactly how far this story has traveled. Don't go anywhere. You will not want to miss a single moment of what comes next. Zuri Bennett Kang had learned a long time ago that there was a particular kind of silence that lived inside beautiful houses. Not the peaceful kind, not the comfortable quiet of a home where people feel safe enough to rest. This was the other kind, the silence that fills the spaces between things people refuse to say out loud. The silence that settles into the walls of a place where everyone knows something is wrong and has collectively decided not to name it. She had first felt it the day she arrived. 3 years ago, Joon-seok had brought her to the Kang estate on a Tuesday afternoon in late October. The trees lining the driveway had already turned deep red and amber, the kind of colors that look beautiful in photographs and feel cold in real life. She remembered thinking the house was the largest private residence she had ever stood in front of. She also remembered thinking that the woman standing in the entrance did not look like someone who was happy to see her. Kang Hai-rin had looked at her son's new wife the way a person looks at a stain on expensive fabric. Not with rage, not with open hostility. Just with a careful, measured assessment, followed by a smile so thin and controlled it barely qualified as an expression. "Welcome," she had said, and that single word had contained an entire language that Zuri was still learning to read. Joon-seok had squeezed her hand. He had introduced her to the household staff, to the necessities gathered in the receiving room, to the aunts and cousins and family associates who rotated through the estate like planets orbiting a sun. He had been warm and certain, unafraid. She had loved him for that, the way he carried no apology for choosing her. But Joon-seok left a lot. That was the part nobody told her about the hours. Then the days, then the weeks where the estate belonged entirely to his mother and his relatives, and the invisible rules that governed all of them. Business called him away constantly. Meetings that couldn't wait, calls that ran until 3 in the morning, trips that stretched from 2 days into 5. He called her every night he was gone. He sent things flowers, jewelry once, a first edition book she'd mentioned wanting after passing a shop window 2 months before, which meant he had actually been paying attention. He was not a negligent husband. He just wasn't home enough to see. The food thing had started small. That was how Hai-rin operated, in increments so gradual that by the time you felt the full weight of what was happening, you were already too deep inside it to name the exact moment it began. The first time, it had seemed almost accidental. A meal had been served, and somehow Zuri's portion came from a container in the refrigerator rather than the pot still warm on the stove. She had assumed it was an oversight. She hadn't said anything. The second time, she had noticed that every other person at the table was eating fresh. The third time, she had caught the housekeeper, a quiet woman named Mrs. O, who kept her eyes permanently aimed at her own feet, glancing toward Hai-rin before setting the plate down. Just a glance, a half-second of checking. That was the moment Zuri understood that it was not an accident. It had never been an accident. But what do you do with that knowledge? She had turned it over in her mind for weeks. She had considered saying something to Joon-seok, had even picked up her phone once, with the intention of calling him and asking, casually, whether he knew what was happening at his own dinner table. But every time she got close to that conversation, something stopped her. Not fear, exactly. More like specific kind of dread. The dread of becoming the woman who called her husband home from a business meeting to complain about his mother's cooking choices. The dread of being the problem, the intruder, the outsider, who didn't understand how things worked in this family. And Hai-rin had been very careful to make sure Zuri felt like an outsider. It wasn't the food. That was never just about the food. It was the way family gatherings were scheduled when Joon-seok was confirmed to be out of the city, and somehow, the notification to Zuri came a day after the event had passed. "Oh, I thought you knew. Didn't someone tell you?" It was the way household decisions moved around her repairs, staff scheduling, deliveries all handled through a chain of communication that somehow never included her. It was the way Hai-rin would speak in Korean at meals, when mixed conversation had been the norm, and then laugh at something with the relatives and offer Zuri a polite translation that stripped all the humor from whatever had just been said, leaving her holding a hollow version of a moment everyone else had shared. And it was the silence of the people who watched all of this happen and said nothing. That was the part that got to Zuri in ways she hadn't expected. She was a grown woman. She had survived genuinely hard things before this. A childhood in a neighborhood that didn't have the luxury of pretending life was simple. A career she had built from absolute scratch. A series of losses that had required her to develop a particular kind of spine that could bend without breaking. She was not fragile. She did not need protecting from discomfort. But she had not been prepared for the specific loneliness of being surrounded by people who witnessed her being diminished and responded with polite, careful, strategic blindness. The cousin, Kang Sung-yeon, who was 23 and genuinely kind when Joon-seok was present, would find something very interesting to look at on the other side of the room whenever Hai-rin made one of her remarks. An aunt named Park Soo-jin laughed at things. Hai-rin said that were not objectively funny, which meant she wasn't laughing at the joke she was performing loyalty. The household staff moved with the efficiency of people who had long ago decided that noticing things was not in their job description. Zuri had stopped expecting backup. She'd also stopped eating much at those dinners. There was something that happened to your appetite when the act of sitting down to eat had become freighted with so much deliberate meaning. She would sit at the table, the plate would come. Cold rice, old meat, vegetables that had been correctly stored but had still lost something essential. And Hai-rin would look at her just long enough, with just that particular quality of attention, to make certain Zuri understood that this was intentional. Then she'd return to her conversation, to her warm food, to her family. And Zuri would sit there with the specific task of deciding, again, whether tonight was the night she pushed back. Most nights, she pushed the plate aside. "You're not eating again, Mrs." O had said once, so quietly it barely registered as speech. She was refilling water glasses, not looking at Zuri, and for a moment, Zuri thought she'd misheard. "I'm fine," Zuri said. Mrs. O had hesitated for just a breath too long before moving to the next glass. That hesitation had stayed with Zuri for days. She'd thought about it while lying awake at 3 a.m, with the estate silent around her and Joon-seok's side of the bed empty again. She'd thought about what it meant that Mrs. O had said that quietly enough that no one could accuse her of anything, but clearly enough that Zuri had heard. It was the smallest possible act of witness, the minimum viable acknowledgement that a person was being treated wrong. And still, somehow it had been almost enough to make Zuri cry. That was how starved she was, for someone to simply notice. The night everything changed had begun like every other night Joon-seok was away. Rain against the windows, the smell of food being prepared for the family dinner, deep, warm, complex smells that filled the hallways of the estate and then delivered themselves as something cold and left over to the woman who lived there. Hai-rin was in particularly elevated spirits that evening. A business arrangement of her own had concluded well. She was holding court at the dinner table with the comfortable authority of a woman who had never been seriously challenged in her own domain. Zuri came to the table, because she always came to the table. She had decided somewhere in the second year that refusing to show up was a different kind of losing. If she stayed in her room, the family would say she was antisocial, difficult, didn't try to assimilate, so she came. She sat. She accepted the plate with its cold rice and its reheated meat, and she worked very hard at keeping her face neutral while Hyrin described the successful outcome of her arrangement to an audience of relatives who nodded with practiced enthusiasm. The plate was particularly bad that night. Zuri wasn't sure whether it was because the original dish had not been very good, or because it had been stored badly, or simply because the accumulation of 2.5 years of this specific ritual had made her capacity for tolerating it quietly run out. She looked at the food. She looked at the dishes being passed around the table for everyone else. She looked at Hyrin, who was not looking at her, and that inattention was its own statement. She pushed the plate aside. Hyrin stopped mid-sentence. It was the first time Zuri had done it openly, in front of the whole table, without disguising the motion as reaching for her water glass or adjusting her position. She simply moved the plate away from herself with her forearm and set her hands in her lap and looked at the center of the table, at the serving dishes that no one had offered to her. The table went quiet in that particular way, of a group of people who have just witnessed a line being crossed and are recalibrating their positions. Hyrin looked at the plate, then at Zuri. "You don't want it," she said. It wasn't a question. "No," Zuri said. She kept her voice even. She was proud of that later. Hyrin tilted her head slightly. "That food is good enough for someone like you." It landed in the room the way these things always land, when someone finally says the quiet part out loud, not as a shock, exactly, but as a confirmation. As if every person at that table had been waiting for Hyrin to say it in plain language, and now that she had to, there was a specific quality of relief mixed into their discomfort. Now everyone knew exactly where they stood. Zuri felt the heat rise in her face and made the decisions in the space of a single second not to cry. She had never cried in front of this family. She was not going to start. "Then I don't want it," she said. "Then go hungry," Hyrin replied, and turned back to her dinner. The relatives around the table would return to their plates with varying degrees of guilt and commitment. The aunt on Hyrin's left resumed her conversation, like a car engine, turning back over. The cousin Sung-yeon stared at a fixed point, somewhere between his water glass and the window. Mrs. O, moving along the periphery of the room with a serving cloth, became very focused on the water pitcher. Zuri sat with her hands in her lap, at a table full of people eating fresh, warm food, and she breathed through her nose slowly, and thought about nothing at all for a moment, the way she had learned to do when she needed the feeling inside her to get very small and compact, so she could carry it somewhere private. She didn't hear the hallway door. She didn't hear footsteps. The first thing she was aware of was a shift in the quality of the room's attention, a collective intake that didn't make a sound, but was absolutely felt. The particular stillness that falls over a group of people when they sense that something behind them has changed. She looked up. Kang Joon-seok was standing in the doorway. He was still in his coat, still holding his car keys, apparently, because she could hear them in his hand. His meeting, which had been scheduled to run until tomorrow morning, which he had called her about at noon to say he'd be back Thursday at the earliest, had ended. He had come home, and, from the expression on his face, he had been standing there long enough. Hyrin's color drained so completely and so fast that for a moment she looked like a different person. The aunt who had been laughing a moment ago set down her chopsticks with a very careful movement, like someone placing something fragile on a ledge. The cousin stared at the table. Joon-seok did not look at his mother. He looked at Zuri. She realized, in that moment, that her face had been showing everything she had spent 2.5 years keeping hidden, because she hadn't known he was there. She had not been performing stillness or patience or the composed dignity she'd cultivated for exactly these dinners. He had walked in during the one moment she hadn't been ready, and whatever was written on her face when she looked up, and found him standing there, the shock, and then the complicated flood of something that wasn't quite relief and wasn't quite grief, but to contain pieces of both, was the most honest thing he had ever seen from her at this table. She watched him look at her plate. She watched him look at every other plate on the table. She watched something move through his face that she could not name and that frightened her a little, because she had heard stories about what Joon-seok looked like when he became frightening. And this stillness, this quiet looked like the thing those stories were about. He took a breath. "How long?" he said. His voice was quiet. It was the quietest she had ever heard it. She understood instinctively the most dangerous version of his voice. Joon-seok Zuri. He said her name like a door closing gently. How long? She opened her mouth to say it didn't matter. She had actually rehearsed that sentence in some internal way for exactly this not scenario that she had not truly believed would happen the moment when he found out, and she would have the choice as to minimize it or tell the truth. She had always assumed she would minimize it. She had always assumed she would protect the peace that she was the only person in this house actively working to maintain. But her mouth had become somehow independent of that plan. 2.5 years, she said. The room did not make a sound. Joon-seok looked at Mrs. O. Mrs. O looked at the floor, and then looked up, and her eyes were already wet, and she said in a voice that was barely holding itself together, "Yes, sir." Since almost the beginning, I was told not to give her fresh food when you were away. I was told you had approved it. The last sentence dropped into the room, like something heavy falling from a height. Zuri heard and felt the ground shift under a belief she had not known she was standing on. She had known Hyrin was doing this deliberately. She had known it was cruelty with intention. What she had not known, what she had not let herself fully consider, was that someone had thought to tell her Joon-seok knew. Someone had built the cage and told her the person she trusted most had helped design it. She looked at her husband. He was looking at his mother. And Hyrin, for the first time in 2.5 years, had nothing to say. The keys in Joon-seok's hand made a small sound as his grip shifted. He walked to the table. He picked up Zuri's plate, the cold rice, the reheated meat, the wilted vegetables, and he carried it to where his mother sat, and he set it down in front of her. "If this is what my wife deserves," he said, "then this is what this family deserves." He didn't raise his voice once. He didn't have to. Outside, the rain continued. Inside the Kang estate, at a dinner table, full of people, eating warm food that had suddenly lost all its appeal, Kang Joon-seok pulled out the chair beside his wife, sat down, and did not look at a single other person in the room. He looked only at Zuri, and she, who had not cried in front of this family in 2.5 years, who had refined her endurance into something so practiced it, had almost become identity, felt her throat close around something she could not name. "I'm sorry," he said, only to her, so quietly only she could hear. It was not enough. She already knew it was not enough, and so did he. There was going to have to be more conversation, more reckoning, more of whatever came next when a man discovered that the house he believed he controlled had been running a second shadow of itself whenever his back was turned. The story was far from over, but for the first time since she'd walked through the front door of this estate on a cold October afternoon and heard a woman say welcome, in a way that meant the opposite, Zuri Bennett Kang was not sitting at the edge of anything. She was sitting next to her husband, and every person in that room who had looked away for 2.5 years was now learning, in the same moment she was, what it looked like when Kang Joon-seok finally saw. Nobody moved. That was the thing Zuri would remember later, not the words, not even Joon-seok's face, when he set that plate down in front of his mother. What she would remember was the way 11 adults, sitting around a table with food in front of them, became completely, collectively still, like animals that understand a predator has entered the space and have made the calculation that movement is more dangerous than stillness. Hyrin was looking at the plate, the old rice, the dried-out meat, the vegetables that had given up their color sometime the previous afternoon. All of it sitting in front of the woman who had been ordering it, delivered to her daughter-in-law for nearly 3 years, and now the room waited to see what she would do with that fact. Made physical, made visible, placed under her nose like evidence at a trial she had believed she would never face. She pushed it aside, not with any particular force, not dramatically, Just that same practiced indifference she had used on Zuri every single night, the smooth, unhurried motion of a woman dismissing something beneath her consideration. She pushed the plate a few inches to the left and folded her hands on the table and looked at her son. "You're overreacting," she said. Joon-seok pulled out the chair next to Zuri and sat down. He didn't respond immediately. He looked at his mother the way a person looks at a math problem they've already solved, checking their work. Then he turned to one of the household staff near the door, a young man named Daeho who worked evening shifts and had the specific quality of someone who wished very badly to be in a different room. "Bring my wife a fresh plate," Joon-seok said. "Whatever was made tonight." "Yes, sir." Daeho was already moving. Hyrin's jaw tightened. "We are in the middle of dinner, I can see that. You've been traveling, you're tired. Come sit, eat, and we can talk about Mother." He said it, the way you say a word when you want it to function as a full stop. "Don't." The aunt on Hyrin's left, Park Soo-jin, developed a sudden intense interest in the texture of her napkin. The cousin Sung-yeon had not looked up from the table in 4 minutes. Mrs. Oh had positioned herself against the far wall, with the careful invisibility of someone who has made a professional calculation about where to be during a moment like this. Dae-ho returned with a plate. Real food, warm, the same meal everyone else at that table had been eating. He set it in front of Zuri with both hands and stepped back quickly. Zuri looked at it. She wasn't hungry. That was the absurd part after years of cold food being the issue. Now that warm food was sitting in front of her, her stomach had sealed itself shut with tension. But she picked up her chopsticks because Joon-seok was watching, and she understood that this moment required her participation. That this was not just dinner, it was a statement being made in a language everyone in this room understood. She ate one bite. It was good. Of course it was good. It had always been good. That had been the point. Hyrin watched her and then looked at Joon-seok. "You're embarrassing this family." "I'm embarrassing this family," he repeated. "Coming in here, making a scene in front of everyone." "How long do you think you've been making a scene, Mother?" His voice was still quiet. That was what made it worse. There was no heat in it, no momentum of anger that might break and release some of the pressure. He spoke the way a building looks before it falls. Upright, completely intact, already finished. "How long do you think I've been living in a house where my wife was being treated like a servant, and you were telling the staff it had my approval?" Hyrin's chin came up. "Mrs. O." He didn't raise his voice. He just shifted his attention. "Tell her what you told me." Mrs. O pressed her lips together. She had the look of a woman who had known for a long time that this moment would come and had spent that time hoping it would happen after she had retired. She straightened her back the way people do when they've made a decision they can't unmake. "Mrs. Kang told us," she said, her voice steady in the way voices get when emotion has been converted entirely into precision, that you had discussed the arrangements with her. That you felt it was appropriate for Mrs. Bennett Kang to be served differently while you were away. That if we had concerns, we should bring them to her rather than contact you directly. The room absorbed this. Hyrin turned toward Mrs. O with an expression that would have made a reasonable person take a step backward. Mrs. O did not take a step backward. "You were told to handle household matters discreetly," Hyrin said. "You were not told to..." "She was told to lie," Zuri said. It came out flat and clear. No performance, no shaking in it. Just the statement, placed into the room like a piece of furniture that would now have to be worked around. Hyrin looked at her. "I beg your pardon. You told your staff to give me cold food and told them my husband approved it. That's not a household decision. That's a lie you built, so I would think he knew and didn't care." Zuri set her chopsticks down. Her hands were steady, which surprised her. "I spent 2 years thinking about whether to tell him, because I genuinely thought maybe he does know. Maybe this is something he allowed. And you knew I was thinking that. You built it that way on purpose." Hyrin said nothing, and her silence was its own confession. Joon-seok had gone very still beside Zuri. The kind of still that is not calm, that is, in fact, the opposite of calm, the way the surface of water goes flat, right before pressure from below, turns it into something else entirely. "Everyone who is not immediate family," he said, without looking away from his mother, "Please leave the room." The relatives moved. There was no discussion, no hesitation beyond what was physically required to push back chairs and collect themselves. Park Soo-jin stood so fast. She caught the edge of her water glass, steadied it without looking, and was out of the room in 11 seconds. The other relatives followed with varying degrees of visible relief. Even Sung-seon, who had been sitting like a man trying to become part of the table, unfolded himself and left without meeting anyone's eyes. The household staff cleared out with professional efficiency. Mrs. O was the last one. She paused at the door. Joon-seok looked at her. "Stay." She stopped, turned back, found a position near the wall that was close enough to be present and far enough to not be part of whatever was about to happen between the three people remaining at the table. Hyrin waited until the door closed. Then she looked at her son with an expression Zuri had seen her use on business calls, the face of someone who is recalibrating their position without appearing to recalibrate. "You have to understand," Hyrin said, "that I did what I did to protect this family." Joon-seok didn't answer. She came into this house without understanding anything about who we are, without understanding what it costs to be part of a family like ours. The name she carries now, do you think that comes without responsibility, without expectation? "Keep going," Joon-seok said. Hyrin heard the invitation, and because she was who she was, she accepted it. "I wanted to see what she was made of, whether she could handle the pressures of this life, whether she had the strength." "You gave her cold rice," Joon-seok said. "Every night I was gone, for 2.5 years. And you told the staff I approved it. Is that your version of a strength test?" "I was teaching her." "What were you teaching her?" Hyrin Sin stopped. "What lesson?" Joon-seok said. "Were you planning to deliver with yesterday's leftovers?" He leaned forward slightly. "Say it out loud." Hyrin pressed her hands flat on the table. "I was teaching her that this family has standards, that my son's name carries weight, that the woman beside him must." "Must what?" "Starve quietly?" He looked at her, just looked at her for a long moment. "You were teaching her that she doesn't belong here. That's what you were doing. Every night I left this house, you made sure the woman I married understood, in the clearest possible language, that she was not wanted. And when you ran out of ways to make her feel that, you found a way to make her think I agreed with you. Did you think I wouldn't find out? Or did you think that by the time I did, it wouldn't matter anymore?" His voice dropped even lower. "Which one is worse, Mother? That you didn't think I'd see it, or that you thought, if you did it long enough, I'd have nothing to say about it?" Hyrin's composure had developed cracks. Not breaks, she was too practiced for breaks. But there were lines forming in it, places where the held expression was not quite holding. "I am your mother," she said. "I have spent my entire life." "I know what you've spent your entire life doing." He wasn't cold anymore. He was something else now, tired, in a way that had nothing to do with travel. "I know what you sacrificed. I know what this family cost you. And I have never, not once, treated that as a small thing." He waited a moment. "But I need you to hear me say this, and I need you to actually hear it." He looked at his mother across the table between them. "Zuri is my wife. She is not a guest I am housing. She is not a trial you are administering. She is the person I chose, and what you have done to her in this house, in my name, while I was working to keep everything that feeds this family fed, that is not something I'm going to sit down and discuss until we find a comfortable version of it. Sen, Hidori." Hyrin's eyes had gone bright, not with tears that would come later. In private, Zuri suspected. Right now, they were bright with something closer to fury, the specific fury of a woman who has never been spoken to this way by her own child, and is discovering that her body doesn't know what to do with the experience. "She has done this," Hyrin said. "She has turned you against me. Nobody turned me anywhere. I walked through my own front door. You don't see it because I'm what?" Hyrin closed her mouth. "Say it," Joon-seok said quietly. "You've been saying things for 2.5 years. Don't stop now." The silence stretched. Somewhere in the house, a clock was ticking. The rain had eased outside and left behind a wet quiet that made the room feel sealed. Zuri had been watching this exchange, with the careful attention of someone witnessing a structural event, the way you watch a building coming down, not able to look away, aware that what you are seeing cannot be undone. She had imagined this conversation happening 100 times in the dark at 3 in the morning. She had never imagined Joon-seok being this contained. She had expected anger she would have to manage, emotion she would have to navigate around. She had not expected this. A man dismantling his mother's position with the same quiet efficiency he probably used to dismantle everything else that threatened what he had built. She had also not expected to feel this conflicted about it, because watching Hai-rin across that table, the brightness in her eyes, the controlled desperation, the absolute certainty beginning to crumble at the edges, Zuri felt something she had not anticipated feeling. Not sympathy exactly. She was not built to feel sympathy right now, and she wasn't going to pretend otherwise. But something adjacent to it. The awareness that the woman across the table was a person who had spent decades building a world around a specific understanding of how power worked and who belonged to what, and that world was doing something she had not planned for it to do. It was falling apart, not because she had been exposed, but because the person she had most counted on to be blind, the person she had arranged everything around the absence of, had walked through the door. "I want to know one thing," Zuri said. Both of them looked at her. She kept her eyes on Hai-rin, the gifts, the ones Joon-seok sent when he was away, the ones I never received, or received weeks late, or received with things missing. She watched Hai-rin's face. "How many of those did you intercept?" A beat. Joon-seok turned toward his mother slowly. Hai-rin said nothing, which was its own answer, but Zuri let the silence run, because she had learned, in 2.5 years of being on the wrong end of this woman's strategy, sometimes the most powerful thing you could do was wait. "There was a book," Zuri said finally. "First edition. He sent it in February of our first year. He told me to look for it, called me specifically to tell me it was coming. I waited 3 weeks. I told him it must have gotten lost in delivery. I apologized to him for losing it." She paused. "Did it get lost?" Hai-rin's jaw moved. "Did it get lost?" "You are twisting. Answer her." Joon-seok's voice was barely audible. Hai-rin looked at her son for a long moment. The fury had not left her eyes. But underneath it, buried deep in a place she had not intended anyone to excavate tonight, there was something else. Something that might have been, you were inclined to be generous, the beginning of an awareness of what she had done. She was not inclined to name it. Not here. Not in front of both of them. "I kept certain items that I felt were inappropriate given the circumstances," she said. "I made decisions I believed were in the best interest of this household." The room went completely silent. Joon-seok stood up. It was a simple action. He placed his hands on the table, pushed his chair back, and stood. He was not a physically imposing man, in the way people sometimes imagine he was lean and medium height, and there was nothing theatrical about the way he moved. But the room changed when he stood. The air changed. Even Mrs. O against the far wall seemed to become very aware of her own breathing. "I'm going to need you to call your attorney in the morning," he said to his mother. Hai-rin stared at him. "What?" "Your personal attorney. Not the family firm, your personal one. Call him at 8. He picked up his jacket from the back of his chair. "We're going to need to have a conversation about what belongs to you and what belongs to me, because I think that line has gotten confused somewhere in the last 30 years, and I should have clarified it a long time ago." Joon-seok. Her voice cracked, just slightly, just at the end of his name. "You cannot mean I'll have my people contact yours about the schedule." He looked at Zuri and held out his hand. "Come with me." Zuri looked at his hand for a moment. Then she looked at Hai-rin. She thought about 2.5 years. She thought about 3 in the morning and cold rice, and the particular sound of a family laughing at something in a language they had stopped translating for her. She thought about a book she had apologized to her husband for losing, a book he had chosen specifically because he had been paying attention, a book currently sitting somewhere in this house that she had never been allowed to read. She took Joon-seok's hand and stood. They walked out. Mrs. O followed because she had been told to stay, and Joon-seok had not told her to leave, and she was a woman who understood that the next few hours would require witnesses. The dining room door swung shut behind them. In the hallway, Joon-seok stopped walking. His hand tightened briefly on Zuri's and then released, and she watched him stand there, facing the wall with his head slightly bowed, and his breathing doing something deliberate and controlled that she recognized as what happened when he was getting ahead of something internal. That could not be allowed to surface in a hallway. She waited. "How long have you known about the gifts?" he said. "To the wall, not to her." "I didn't know," she said. "I suspected. After the book, there were a few other things. Small things. I told myself I was being paranoid." He turned around. His face was she had no word for it. There was too much in it, and it was all being held too tightly. And she could see the effort of that, holding in the muscles around his jaw and the set of his eyes. "You apologized to me," he said, "for a book I sent you." That she took. "I didn't know she took it." "You apologized to me," he said again, quieter, like he was repeating it so he could believe it. "I thought it had gotten lost. I called the courier. I spent a week." He stopped. He looked away. He came back. "I told you I would replace it. You said not to bother. It wasn't important." "You said that." "I know. Why did you say that?" She looked at him for a moment. "Because by then I'd been in this house long enough to understand that fighting for small things cost more than they were worth. I thought if I kept the peace, eventually." She stopped. "I don't know what I thought eventually. That things would settle. That it would get easier." Joon-seok made a sound that was not quite a laugh. There was nothing funny in it. Did it get easier? No. He turned away again. He walked a few steps down the hallway and stopped again, facing a wall of framed photographs. Photographs. 3 generations of the Kang family in formal arrangements, Hyrin young and sharp-eyed and beautiful in a way that Zuri could see now, could acknowledge, even after everything. Joon-seok at various ages. His father, who had died when he was 19 and whose absence had created the specific shape of the man currently standing in front of these photographs, not looking at them. "My father used to say," Joon-seok said, not to her, not to the photographs, just into the space, "that the hardest thing about building something is that you get so focused on the outside walls that you stop checking what's happening inside them." He was quiet for a moment. "I always thought he meant the business, the organization. I thought he meant you can't be so worried about external threats that you ignore internal ones." He turned around. "He meant the house," he said. He was talking about the house. Wasn't he? It wasn't a question. She didn't answer it. Down the hall, behind the closed dining room door, there was no sound. Hyrin was not throwing things or summoning people. She was sitting, Zuri imagined, in the specific silence of a woman, reorganizing herself after a battle she had not expected to lose tonight, and had certainly not expected to lose like this. She would be thinking, she would be planning. Whatever came next from her would not be impulsive. Hyrin Kang did not operate impulsively. What came next would be considered and strategic, and it would come when she had found her footing again. That thought, that certainty, sat in Zuri's chest like a stone, because she knew this wasn't over, not even close. Joon-seok spent that night on the phone. Zuri didn't sleep. She lay in the bed they shared in a house that felt than it had that morning, listening to his voice in the next room, low, continuous, the occasional word cutting through the door more clearly than the rest. She heard attorney several times. She heard documentation. Once she heard her own name, and she pressed her face into the pillow and stayed very still. At some point before 4 in the morning, he came to bed. She kept her breathing even. He lay down carefully, not touching her, which was its own kind of conversation. She listened to him not sleep for a long time. At 4:47, she said, to the ceiling, "I should have told you sooner." He was quiet for a moment. "You shouldn't have had to tell me at all. It's not how it works." "No," he agreed. "It's not." Another silence. The rain had come back, lighter now. The kind of rain that doesn't make a sound, just makes everything outside darker and closer. "She told you I approved it," he said. "Someone on the staff told me. I assumed it came from her. I never asked Joon-seok." She paused. "I was afraid of what it would mean, if it was true." He turned his head to look at her in the dark. She could feel it more than see it. I know that now." "Zuri, I know that now," she said again, because the second time was different from the first. The first was a fact, and the second was what she was choosing to do with it. I know. He reached out and found her hand in the dark. They lay there for a while. Neither of them slept. By morning, Joon-seok had made calls Zuri was not present for, and set meetings in motion that she understood were serious, but whose full shape she couldn't yet see. He was quiet at breakfast, not the hostile quiet of someone pulling away, but the concentrated quiet of someone managing multiple things at once, which was something she had learned to read in him early in their relationship. The way his attention went internal and deep when he was working through something with real stakes. She drank her coffee. He drank his. The housekeeper who brought them was not Mrs. O, which suggested that the staff arrangements were already in some kind of flux. The person who brought the coffee was a young woman Zuri, barely recognized from peripheral encounters in the kitchen hallway, and she set the cups down with the precision of someone who was acutely aware that the ground rules of this household had changed overnight and was navigating very carefully. Hai-rin did not come to breakfast. The cousins who lived on the estate were at the table but ate in the compressed, careful way of people who know they are not the focus of what is happening and are therefore trying to occupy as little narrative space as possible. Sung-yeon ate his rice in 11 minutes and disappeared. The attorney meeting happened at 10. Zuri was not in it. She found out it was happening because she nearly walked into it, turned a corner on her way to the library, and found 3 men she didn't recognize in the receiving room outside the study, and Daeho intercepted her with apologetic efficiency. Mr. Kang asked if you'd be comfortable waiting in the East Wing, Mrs. Kang. She looked at the men. Suits. Briefcases. The stillness of people who are paid to be in rooms where large decisions are made. Fine, she said. She went to the East Wing. She sat in a room with a window that looked out at the estate's back garden, and she waited, and the waiting had a specific quality. It was not passive. It was not patient. It was the active, grinding work of being outside a conversation that was, at least in part, about her life, and not being able to hear any of it. She was still sitting there 2 hours later when Joon-seok found her. He closed the door behind him. He looked tired in a way that had accumulated rather than arrived. The way tiredness does when it's been building for a night and a morning and isn't close to done yet. He sat across from her. I need you to hear something, he said. She waited. Last night, I found out about the food and the gifts and the staff instructions. He linked his hands between his knees. This morning, my attorney started pulling records on the estate accounts. Household expenses. Event scheduling. He paused. It goes further than I realized. The stone in her chest shifted. How much further? He looked at her steadily. There were events. Family events. Celebrations. Gatherings. The kind of thing that would have been normal for you to attend as my wife. 8 of them in the last 2 years. My mother told the organizers that you had declined to attend. That you had specifically asked not to be included. Zuri felt something move through her that was cold and had no name. I never declined anything, she said. I know, I was never asked. I know. I thought she stopped. She thought about the family dinners she'd missed because no one mentioned them. The events she'd found out about from offhand comments made in her presence weeks later. The way she had concluded, slowly and miserably, that the Kang family simply did not include her, and she had stopped waiting for invitations that were never going to come. I thought they just didn't want me there. They were told you didn't want to be there. The calculation of it settled over her, the architecture of the thing. It was not cruelty for its own sake, it was engineering. It was the systematic construction of an isolation that could be blamed on her, that would make Joon-seok's family see her as the one building walls, the one refusing to integrate, the one who kept herself apart. And all the while, from the inside, she experienced it as rejection, as evidence that she had never belonged here, as confirmation of every doubt she had carried through every cold meal and empty seat. She needed me to fail, Zuri said. Joon-seok didn't answer, which was an answer. She needed me to either leave or become someone she could manage. And she needed me to do it in a way where Zuri stopped. She was putting together something as she spoke it, assembling it out loud, and it was not finished yet. If I complained to you, I was the difficult wife. If I stayed quiet, she could keep building. Either way, she kept her position. She looked up at him. You see how it works? There was no version where I won. She designed it so I couldn't win. Joon-seok stood up. He walked to the window and looked out at the garden and put one hand flat on the glass. I want to tell you something, he said, and I need you to know I'm not saying it as an excuse. She waited. I have spent 15 years building something that requires me to be outside this house as much as I'm inside it. Every hour I put into making that world run, the way it runs every person who is safe inside these walls because of what I built out there, it came at a cost. And I told myself the cost was acceptable because the walls were solid. He didn't turn around. I never thought about what was happening inside them. Zuri said nothing. I failed you, he said. Not because I'm a bad husband. I don't think I'm a bad husband. But I built a house where I was the only person my wife could tell the truth to, and then I was gone so much that even that door wasn't open. He finally turned. His face was not the contained, frightening stillness from the night before. It was something more human than that. Something that looked like a man standing inside the specific grief of understanding the full cost of his blind spots for the first time. And she used that. She used every day I wasn't here. The room was very quiet. Zuri thought about all the things she could say. She had a stockpile of them 2.5 years' worth of sentences she had swallowed rather than speak into a hallway that had no one to receive them. She could deploy any one of them right now. She could be completely right about every single one. Instead, she said, "What happens next?" He looked at her. Something in his face reorganized. "Tomorrow morning," he said, "I'm calling everyone in. All of them. Every relative who lives here on my money, who works for my organization because of family connection, who uses my name to open doors that their own names would never open." He said it without heat, which made it sound more final than fury would have. Every person who sat at that table while my wife was given yesterday's food and said nothing. They will be in the formal meeting room at 9 a.m., and they will receive information about what does that change in their lives. Zuri looked at him. "And your mother?" He met her eyes. "She will be there too." The stone in Zuri's chest did not go away. She was beginning to understand it was not going to go away quickly, that it was going to take time and more than one conversation, and probably some number of nights where she lay awake, in this house that had a different same walls, same rooms, same hallways, that knew her footsteps, but with something fundamental shifted in its structure that she could feel but not yet see clearly. But she also understood. Sitting across from her husband, in the pale morning light coming through a window that looked out on a garden she had mostly avoided because it was a space where she'd been made to feel like a visitor, that they had arrived at something. Not a resolution, not an ending. A point from which there was no going back to the version of this house that had existed yesterday, where everything was managed and controlled and buried under the smooth surface of a household that ran on his power and her silence. That version was done. What came next, neither of them could fully see yet. But at 9 o'clock the following morning, in the formal meeting room of the Kang estate, with attorneys and accountants and security officers, and documents spread across a table that had hosted decisions of real consequence before it would begin to take shape, and the people in that room would understand, finally and completely, that the man who had built everything they depended on had been watching his wife eat cold food in his own house. And the meeting room had 9 chairs arranged around a rectangular table that Zuri had walked past 100 times without ever sitting at. She was sitting at it now. To her left, Joon-seok. To his left, 2 attorneys. She had never met a man in his 50s, with the particular stillness of someone who had been in rooms like this many times and had learned to treat other people's crises as weathers, something to be navigated rather than felt. Beside him, a younger woman with a yellow legal pad already half covered in notes, taken before anyone else had arrived. On the opposite side of the table, an accountant with a laptop, and 2 men from Joon-seok's security detail who were not there to take notes. They were there because Joon-seok had decided that certain conversations required witnesses of a specific kind. Documents were stacked in 3 separate piles. The window blinds had been angled, so the morning light came in flat and gray and didn't favor anyone. The relatives arrived in groups, not because they had organized themselves. So Zuri would learn later that Joon-seok's people had delivered the summons individually, in writing, the previous evening. They arrived in groups because this was a house full of people who had spent years moving in social formations, always calibrating who to stand near and who to stand away from. And this morning that instinct had arranged them, the way water arranges itself in a new container, finding its natural level. Park Soo-jin came in first, with two other aunts. She looked at Zuri directly for about half a second, then looked away and found a chair at the far end of the table. The cousin Sung Yeon arrived alone, sat closest to the door, and put both hands on his knees and kept them there. An uncle named Kang Byung-soo, who ran a subsidiary company on Joon-seok's money and had the comfortable bearing of a man who had never worried about the source of his comfort, sat down with the specific careful ease of someone trying not to look as worried as they were. 11 people total, not counting the attorneys and the accountant, and the two men standing against the wall. Hyrin came last. She wore a dark grays, and her hair was set with the precision of a woman who had spent time this morning on her appearance, not for vanity, but for armor. She looked at every person in the room as she entered, not quickly, but deliberately, each face receiving a fraction of a second of attention that communicated something. She looked at Joon-seok last, and the look she gave him carried a weight that Zuri could not fully decode. Not defeat. Not quite. Something else. Something that had reorganized itself overnight into a new shape. She sat down at the opposite end of the table from her son. Joon-seok waited until everyone had settled. He did not speak immediately. He let the silence build for a moment that was long enough to be intentional and short enough to not be theatrical. Then he opened the folder in front of him and laid 3 pieces of paper flat on the table and did not look at them. "I'm not going to spend time explaining why we're here," he said. "Everyone in this room knows why we're here. What I'm going to do instead is tell you what happens next." The accountant opened his laptop. The younger attorney turned to a new page on her legal pad. Joon-seok looked at Kang Byung-soo first. "The Daejeon distribution contract runs through your company. That contract is mine. The company exists because I funded its initial operating costs and have provided consistent referrals for 8 years. As of Friday, those referrals stop. The contract will be reassigned to another operator." He moved his eyes to the next person before Byung-soo could respond. "The 4 family members currently employed in my organization's administrative offices, their positions were created as accommodations. Those positions are being eliminated. Severance will be issued per standard labor agreements. They are welcome to apply for open positions on their own merit." Someone at the table made a sound. Not a word, just a sound. The kind that escapes before you can stop it. Joon-seok did not acknowledge it. "The 3 properties currently occupied by family members who are not paying market rent, I will be reviewing those arrangements with my attorney. Some of you will receive offers to formalize your leases at current market rates. Some of you will receive relocation timelines." Park Soo-jin finally broke. "Joon-seok." Her voice was controlled but thin at the edges. "We are family. I can," he said. "I have." "Over this?" Over a dinner situation that could have been handled." "Over 2.5 years, he said. "Over a dinner situation that happened. Every night I was away for 2.5 years, while this family sat at the same table and said nothing. Over gifts that were intercepted. Over events my wife was excluded from using her own name as the reason. Over a system that was built inside my house to make the woman I married. Understand she was not welcome here, while everyone in this room, everyone watched it happen, and made the calculation that it was better for them to say nothing." The room was very still. "I am not punishing you for what my mother did," Joon-seok said. "I am ending an arrangement that has existed because of my name and my resources, and my willingness to assume that because the people around me were family, they understood what that meant." He looked at the table. That assumption was wrong. Byung-soo leaned forward. He was 57 and had the face of a man who had survived several difficult things and believed that made him capable of surviving this. "What you're describing will affect people who had nothing to do with." "You were at the table," Joon-seok said. 3 times in the last year that I know of. You were at the table and my wife was given yesterday's food, and you ate your dinner and said nothing. Byung-soo closed his mouth. If you can explain to me what you were afraid of, Joon-seok said, I'll listen. Tell me why you didn't say anything. Tell me what the cost would have been. No one spoke. Right, Joon-seok said. He turned to his mother. Hyrin had not moved since she sat down. She had held the same posture, back straight, hands folded on the table, face arranged in an expression that Zuri was now close enough to read properly. It was not defiance, exactly. It was more like someone gripping a very thin surface over a very large drop, using every bit of available strength to make the grip look effortless. The household staff and domestic accounts have been transferred to Zuri's management, Joon-seok said. She will make hiring and operational decisions going forward. Your personal accounts, the ones drawn from the family operating funds, are being reviewed. You will receive a detailed accounting of what falls under those funds and what I am prepared to continue supporting going forward. Hyrin's folded hands moved, just slightly, just a small adjustment. The household decisions you have made in my name, he continued, including communications sent to family members attributing positions to me that I did not hold, those will be documented. My attorney is preparing a full record. For what purpose? Hyrin said. Her voice was steady, not warm, not cold, steady, in the way a surface is steady when it is being very carefully maintained. For the purpose of having a record, Joon-seok said, in case there is ever any confusion in the future about who authorized what in this house. The implication settled over the room. The younger attorney was writing steadily. The accountant had pulled up a spreadsheet and was not making eye contact with anyone. Sung Yan raised his hand, then seemed to realize how that looked and put it down. I want to say something. Joon-seok looked at him. I knew it was wrong. His voice was 23 years old, and honest in the way that age sometimes still is, before the world finishes teaching people the strategic value of half-truths. I sat at that table and I knew it was wrong and I didn't say anything because he stopped. He looked at his hands. Because she makes you feel like saying something would cost more than you're willing to pay. And that's not an excuse. I know it's not an excuse. I wanted to say I knew. Zuri looked at him across the table. He was not looking at her. He was looking at the table with the expression of someone depositing a payment they wished they'd made a long time ago and are now tendering late, with interest. Thank you, she said. He looked up. He clearly hadn't expected her to say anything. He gave a short nod and looked back at the table. Hyrin made a sound. Not a word, something lower, something that came from a different part of her than language. She looked at Sung Yan with an expression that Zuri caught for only a fraction of a second before it was replaced by the maintained stillness. But she had seen it. She filed it away. The meeting ran another 40 minutes. People received documents. Some people asked questions that Joon-seok's attorney answered in the level tone of someone describing weather forecasts. Some people said nothing at all and held their papers in their hands like they were still processing the weight of them. When it was over, the relatives filed out with varying degrees of composure. Hyrin did not file out with the others. She sat. The attorneys and the accountant exchanged looks and then quietly gathered their materials and gave the room, which was Joon-seok's room, in Joon-seok's house, which they understood did not belong to them. The security men followed. The door closed, and there were 3 people left, Joon-seok, Zuri, and the woman at the other end of the table who had built an entire architecture of control inside this house and was now sitting inside the ruins of it. Are you satisfied? Hyrin said. She was talking to Zuri. Zuri held her gaze. No, what more do you want from? I want the book back, Zuri said. The first edition book he sent me in February, 3 years ago. I want to know where it is. Hyrin blinked. It was such a specific, unexpected thing to say that even her composure had to recalibrate around it. That's what you're asking about. A book, among other things. But yes, start with the book. A pause. Something moved across Hyrin's face that might have been, under very different circumstances, the beginning of reluctant respect. It's in the secondary storage on the 3rd floor. Room at the end of the east corridor. What else is in there? Hyrin looked at her son. Joon-seok said nothing. He had, Zuri noticed, been watching this exchange with the stillness he used when he wanted to see what happened, without putting his hand on the scale. Several items, Hyrin said finally. Packages. A few letters. The word letters landed in the room and did not leave. Joon-seok turned to look at his mother. Letters, he said. Hyrin's chin came up. I intercepted correspondence that I believed was letters. He stood up from the table. He intercepted her mail. I intercepted certain communications that arrived at this address that I felt were letters that were addressed to my wife. Letters from people who I believed were inappropriate contacts for someone in her position. Stop. His voice came out sharper than anything he'd used since the dinner table, and the sharpness of it surprised everyone in the room, including Zuri suspected himself. He stopped. He took a breath. He found the controlled quiet again, but it cost something to find it this time. You took her mail. I protected this family's. You took her mail. He said it a third time because the third time was not repetition. It was the sentence completing itself, becoming fully real with each iteration. For how long? Hyrin did not answer immediately. That was an answer. How long, he said, and this time it was not a question in any real sense. From the beginning, Hyrin said. The beginning. Zuri felt the floor of something give way under her, not physically, but in the specific internal way that happens when a fact you thought you understood reveals itself to be much larger than the shape you had assigned it. She had known about some of the interception. She had suspected it was deliberate. She had not grasped the full scope of it until this moment, when the word beginning hung in the air of the meeting room, and she understood that almost everything she had experienced as abandonment, the silence from people she had expected to reach out, the sense that her world had shrunk to the dimensions of this estate, the gradual and then total isolation that she had partly blamed on herself, had been manufactured. Who wrote to me, she said. The sentence came out wrong, not quite a question, not quite a demand. Halfway between them, like something that was still taking shape. Hyrin looked at her. My mother, Zuri said. Did my mother write to me? The silence that followed was the loudest thing that had happened in this room all morning. She called, Hyrin said. Several times in the first year. The staff was instructed to say you were unavailable. The room tilted. Zuri was aware of Joon-seok very close to her, but not touching her. She was aware of her own breathing, which had become something she had to think about. She was aware of the table under her hands, and the chair under her body, and the window with its flat gray light, and the stack of documents that suddenly seemed very far away. She stopped calling, Zuri said. Yes, because she thought I wasn't taking her calls. I cannot speak to what she thought. She thought I didn't want to talk to her. Siren said nothing. Zuri stood up. She did it slowly, the way a person stands when they are making sure their body will cooperate with the instruction. She placed her hands on the table surface and pushed to standing, and then stood there and breathed through her nose. For a moment the way Joon-seok did in hallways. The way you do when you need the internal thing to stay, where it is long enough for you to do whatever comes next. My mother thought I cut her off, she said. Joon-seok started. She lives in Atlanta. Zuri said, to no one in particular, to the room. She lives alone since my father passed. She has one daughter. And for 2 years, she tried to call that daughter and was told the daughter was unavailable. And eventually she stopped calling, because eventually people stop doing things they believe are unwanted. She looked at Hyrin. Hyrin met her eyes. My mother stopped calling me, Zuri said, because you told her I didn't want to speak to her. I told the staff to say you were unavailable. That is the same thing. Zuri's voice was absolutely steady. That was the thing about hitting a certain level of something. It moved past shaking, past heat, into a place that was cold and clear and had perfect visibility. You told my mother through your staff that her daughter was unavailable. Every time she called. For 2 years. Until she stopped. She looked at the woman across the table. What did you think she would conclude? That I was busy? That I'd call back? You knew exactly what she would conclude. Hyrin's composure had reached its structural limit. It was not gone. It would not be gone entirely. Not here. Not in front of her son. But it had developed a visible fracture along its length that Zuri could see, and that Joon-seok could certainly see, I was protecting. Say that again, Zuri said. Say you were protecting something. I want to hear what you were protecting my mother from. Hyrin stopped. She lost her husband the year before I came here, Zuri continued. My father died 14 months before I married your son. She was alone. She had one daughter who had just married and moved across the world into a family. My mother had no way to access, no way to reach, no way to verify, was treating that daughter well. And you took her calls and told her I wasn't available, and when she stopped calling, you kept her stopped. Zuri's voice cracked. Just once, just at the end of that sentence. She let it crack, and she kept going. Did you ever once think about what that cost her? Hyrin looked at the table. Look at me, Zuri said. Hyrin looked up. Did you ever once think about what you were doing to my mother? The question sat in the room without an answer for a very long moment. Hyrin's expression did something complicated, not remorse, not exactly, nothing that clean or simple. More like a person standing at the edge of a very long distance and finally being made to look at it. I thought about what was best for this family, she said finally. That is not an answer to the question I asked you. Hyrin said nothing. Zuri picked up her hands from the table and stepped back from it. She was done with the table. She was done with this room. She turned to Joon-seok and looked at him, and his face had done the thing it did when he was holding something very large very tightly, and she could see the effort of the holding in the places around his eyes and jaw that he couldn't fully control. I need to call my mother, Zuri said. Yes, he said. Today. Yes. She walked to the door. She put her hand on the handle and then stopped. Because there was one more thing, and she was not going to leave without saying it. She turned back. You told me I should be grateful, she said to Hyrin. That night at the dinner table 2 years ago. The first time you said it out loud. You said I should be grateful I was allowed into this family at all. She looked at the woman who had engineered her isolation with the patience and intelligence of someone who was genuinely skilled at what she did. I have been in this house for nearly 3 years. I have not called my mother in 2 of them, because she believed I had cut her off, and I believed she had stopped reaching out, and neither of us knew. Neither of us knew that you were in the middle of that. Her hand tightened on the door handle. I don't know what you were afraid of. I don't know what version of this house you were trying to protect. But what you built in here, the thing you built to keep me small and separated, and without anything outside these walls to go back to, that is not protection. That is not family. She opened the door, and I am not grateful for it. She walked out. The hallway was empty. The house was quiet in that particular way it got in the mid-morning, when the night's energy had dissipated, and the afternoons hadn't gathered yet. She walked toward the east wing, with a window she had spent 2.5 years not looking out of, and she pulled her phone from her pocket. Her mother's number was still there. Of course it was still there. She had not deleted it. She had just stopped using it. The way you stop reaching for a door you have come to believe is locked. She stood in the hallway and looked at the name on her screen. Beverly Bennett, written in her own hand, added to her contacts before she'd ever arrived in Korea, back when the distance between them had been a logistical fact rather than an emotional wound. She pressed call. It rang 3 times, 4. Then hello? Her mother's voice was careful, not cold careful. The way a voice gets when it has learned to manage its own expectations around a specific source of pain. Zuri knew that sound. She had spent 2 years on the wrong side of a version of it. Mom, she said. A silence. Zuri? And something shifted in that single word, all the careful management falling away at once, the way a door falls when the lock is suddenly removed. Mom, I need to tell you something, Zuri said. She put her back against the wall of the hallway and slid down it until she was sitting on the floor, which was not something she had planned to do and was something she would have been embarrassed by an hour ago. Right now, it was just what her body needed. I need to tell you something that is going to be hard to hear, and I need you to let me get through all of it before you say anything. Okay. Beverly Bennett's voice was already different, already moving toward whatever her daughter needed, the way a mother's voice does when it hears something that is not quite right yet and is already preparing. Okay, baby, I'm here. The hallway was empty and quiet. Zuri closed her eyes, and she began. She told her mother about the calls, about what the staff had been told to say. about the 2 years of silence between them that neither of them had chosen. She heard her mother's breathing change, and she kept going, because she had promised to get through all of it first, and she was going to keep that promise even when her own voice became unreliable and had to be corralled back into coherence twice. When she finished, her mother was quiet for a moment. Then Beverly Bennett said, in a voice so composed, it must have cost her considerably, "Where are you right now?" "The hallway. On the floor." A short pause. "Are you safe?" "Yes." Does he know?" "He knows everything." Another pause. "What's he going to do about it?" Zuri looked at the ceiling. "He already started." Beverly was quiet again. Zuri could hear her breathing in through the nose, was out through the mouth, the pattern her mother used when she was processing something large and choosing her next words with care. "I thought you didn't want to talk to me," Beverly said finally. "I know. I thought you'd moved on." Moved on. Beverly's voice caught on those two words and then released them. "From my child. I was going to move on from my child." "I know. I cried for a month," Beverly said. "I thought I'd done something. Said something when you got married. I went over everything I'd ever said to you about that man and that family, trying to figure out what I'd done to make you." She stopped. When she came back, her voice had steel in it that Zuri recognized because she had inherited it. "Tell me her name, Mom. Tell me her name. It doesn't matter right now." "Zuri Renee Bennett." "Kang Hai Rin," Zuri said, because her mother had used all three names, and you did not ignore all three names. "But Mom, she is being handled. Joon-seok is handling it." "A woman cut my daughter off from her mother for 2 years, Beverly said, with the precise articulation of a woman who wants every syllable to be heard, "and you want me to trust that she is being handled." "I want you to trust me." A long pause. "I do," Beverly said finally. "God help me, I do," she exhaled. "But you call me tomorrow. You call me from now on, whenever you want to, whenever you need to, and I want the number of someone in that house besides you that I can reach if I can't reach you. Okay, and I want to see you." Her voice went softer, unexpectedly. "I want to see your face. I haven't seen your face in a long time." Zuri closed her eyes again. "I know, soon, I promise. I'm going to hold you to that promise, baby. I know you will." They stayed on the phone for another 20 minutes, talking about nothing particularly important. Beverly's neighbor's new dog, a television program Beverly had been watching, the weather in Atlanta. Normal things. The kinds of things families talk about. Zuri sat on the floor of a hallway in a house that was still reconfiguring itself around her and listened to her mother's voice and let herself exist, briefly, inside the specific comfort of being known by someone who had known you before you knew yourself. When she hung up, she stayed on the floor for another minute. Then she got up. She walked back toward the meeting room. The door was still closed. She could hear her husband's voice inside, low and continuous, not the quiet of the meeting, but a different, more private register. A conversation with his mother that she was not part of and did not want to be part of. Not yet. She went instead to find Mrs. O. Mrs. O was in the kitchen, standing at the counter, doing nothing, just standing, her hands wrapped around a mug of something that had gone cold, her eyes on the window above the sink. She looked up when Zuri came in with the expression of a woman who has been waiting for either a verdict or an execution, and cannot yet tell which this is. "The third floor," Zuri said. "Room at the end of the east corridor." "Can you take me there, Mrs.?" "Oh, set down the mug." "Yes, Mrs. Kang." They walked together through the parts of the house Zuri had always used, and then through parts she hadn't, a staircase that had always been present in her peripheral understanding of the building's layout, but that she had no reason to go up. Hallways with the particular quality of spaces that are maintained, but not inhabited. The room at the end of the east corridor was unlocked. It was not a large room. It was the size of what would have been called a study in a smaller house, shelving along 2 walls, boxes stacked with the organized precision of someone who stored things, with the intention of being able to find them again. The blinds were down. Mrs. O went to the window and raised them, and gray morning light came in over everything. Zuri looked at the shelves. She looked at the boxes. She walked to the nearest one and opened it. Inside were packages. Still wrapped, some of them. Padded envelopes with custom stickers and tracking numbers. Gift boxes with bows that had flattened under the weight of other boxes. She picked up the first one and looked at the label. Her name in her husband's handwriting, on a package that had been addressed to her and placed in this room and left here. She opened the next box. Letters. A stack of them held together with a rubber band. She flipped through the return addresses. Atlanta, Georgia. Atlanta. Her aunt in Birmingham. A college friend whose handwriting she hadn't seen in years. Her mother's handwriting on 8 separate envelopes. She sat down on the floor of the room, with the boxes open around her, and held the letters in her hands and did not immediately open them, because she needed a moment first. She needed a moment to exist inside the knowledge of what these letters represented her mother, writing to her, alone in an apartment in Atlanta after her husband's death, reaching out to her daughter across a distance that someone in this house had made sure felt uncrossable. 8 letters. She counted them again. 8. She opened the first one. Her mother's handwriting, which she had not seen in 2 years. Zuri, baby, I know you've been busy settling in and I don't want to bother you, but I haven't heard from you in a while, and I called the house and they said you were unavailable. I hope everything is okay. I'm doing all right. The weather here has been... Zuri pressed the letter flat against her knee and looked at the room. This room. This organized, maintained, carefully managed room with its stacked boxes and its wrapped packages and its stack of rubber-banded letters. This was the architecture of what Hyrin had built. Not the cold food, not the intercepted gifts, not the missed events. Those were the surface of it. This room was the structure underneath. The place where she had stored all the evidence of her work, in careful order, accessible, as if she had always known the day would come when someone would need to account for what had been taken, or as if she had wanted to be able to find it again herself. Zuri did not know what to do with that thought. She sat in the room for a long time, with the letters in her hands. When Joon-seok finally found her, the morning had moved toward noon, and she had opened all 8 of her mother's letters and read them in order and placed them back in sequence and was sitting with them on her lap, looking at the shelves. He stood in the doorway and looked at the room, and then at her, and then at the letters. He did not say anything for a moment. How many packages? He asked finally. I haven't counted. He came in. He sat beside her on the floor, which was something she suspected Kang Joon-seok did not do often, sitting on floors. He looked at the shelves. She kept all of it, he said. Yes. Why would she keep it? Zuri thought about it. Because throwing it away would have been the end of something. Keeping it meant she stopped. I don't know. Control. The possibility of control. If it's here, she knows where it is. If it's here, it still exists in a way that she can account for. He was quiet. She wrote me 8 times, Zuri said. My mother, 8 letters. She looked at the ones in her lap. The last one is from 14 months ago. After that, she stopped. I'll get you the phone records, Joon-seok said. How many times she called? The exact dates. Your mother should have... He stopped. She should know it wasn't you. I called her. She knows. He looked at her. She was on the floor in Atlanta, probably, Zuri said. Doing the same thing I'm doing now. He reached over and took her hand. She let him. They sat on the floor of the storage room with boxes of stolen time around them and the flat noon light coming through the window Hyrin had kept the blinds down on, and for a moment neither of them spoke. Then Joon-seok said very quietly, I need to tell you something else. Zuri felt the specific stillness of someone who has already absorbed a significant amount and is being asked to absorb more. She looked at him. His face was doing the thing again. The tight, careful holding, but there was something else in it now. Something that looked like a man who has found an additional room in a house. He thought he already knew, and is not sure he wants to open the door, but has understood that he must. My attorney found something this morning, he said. While he was pulling the household accounts, she waited. There were communications, he said, between my mother and 2 of my senior associates. Business associates, people inside the organization. He looked at the packages on the shelves instead of at her. Over the last 18 months, she waited. She was providing them with information, he said, about my schedule, my movements, certain decisions I was planning to make regarding the organization's structure. He paused. Information that they could not have had through normal channels. The room went very quiet. She was feeding information about you to people inside your organization, Zuri said slowly. About me, about certain business decisions, reorganizations I was planning. He finally looked at her. Things that would have affected their positions, their income, their leverage. Why would she? Because they had something she wanted. He said it flatly, like a man reading a report about someone he is trying to regard with professional distance. Documentation, evidence that she'd been using estate, accounts for personal expenditures she hadn't disclosed to me. Insurance, maybe. Something to hold over her in case I ever moved to restrict her finances. Zuri stared at him. Your mother was exchanging information about your organization with people inside it, she said, to protect herself from you. Yes, while simultaneously engineering my isolation in this house. Yes, she was playing both sides, Zuri said. She was holding something over your people to keep herself protected, and she was telling them things about you to maintain the value of her position, and the whole time she was making sure I had no one outside this house, no mother, no friends, no connections, so that if everything fell apart, I had nowhere to go. Joon-seok said nothing. She wasn't just trying to push me out, Zuri said. She was building a cage. She needed me contained and isolated and completely dependent on the structure of this house, because if I had options, if I had people, if I had somewhere to go, she couldn't control what I did when I found out. She looked at the boxes around her. She needed me to have nothing. Joon-seok's face was a controlled catastrophe. The holding was visible now, every muscle around his jaw and eyes working to keep what was under the surface from coming to the surface in this room, in front of his wife, on the floor of a storage room full of intercepted evidence of his mother's work. The associates, Zuri said. What are you going to do about the associates? That is being handled separately, he said. Tonight. She looked at him and understood what tonight meant in the language of the man she had married, and she did not ask for clarification. What does this mean for her? Zuri asked. He looked at the shelves for a long moment. It means that what I thought I was dealing with this morning, he said carefully, was a mother who resented my wife and allowed that resentment to make her cruel, which is a terrible thing, which I was already prepared to address. He paused. What I am actually dealing with is a mother who built a strategic operation inside my house, used my wife's isolation as one of its components, and traded information about my organization to protect herself from consequences. He looked at Zuri. Those are not the same problem. No, she said. They're not. The first one is a family matter, he said. The second one is not. The implications of that distinction expanded into the room and filled every corner of it, pressing against the boxes and the letters and the wrapped packages with their flattened bows. And Zuri sat inside those implications and understood with absolute clarity that the version of this situation she had walked into this morning was no longer the version she was sitting inside now. Everything had changed shape. The family meeting, the attorneys, the documents, the careful accounting of what belonged to whom that had been designed to address a mother who was cruel. What Joon-seok now had in his hands was evidence of something that moved in a different category entirely, something that existed in the part of his world that operated outside dinner tables and family meetings and the ordinary cruelties of household politics. And Hyren had known that if this was ever found, the room she was standing in would not be a family room. Zuri looked at her husband's face and saw the man she had married, not the one she had read about in careful whispers before she'd met him, not the one his enemies feared, not the controlled and formal presence he maintained in rooms full of people who needed to believe in his invulnerability. She saw the version she had access to in dark hallways and 3 a.m. silences, the version with the grief still in it and the blind spots and the genuine belief, held desperately in defiance of all the evidence to the contrary, that the house he had built around the people he loved was safe. She put her hand on his arm. He looked at it. Whatever comes next, she said, I need you to promise me one thing. He waited. Whatever you do in whatever room, with whatever people, in whatever part of your world that I don't see, I need you to promise me it doesn't disappear her. She watched his face. Not because she deserves my protection. She doesn't. But because if she disappears, I carry that, and I am not going to carry that. Something moved in his face that was not quite relief and not quite grief, and contained elements of both. I promise, he said. She looked at him for a moment to confirm that he meant it, and she found what she was looking for, and nodded. They sat on the floor together for another minute. Then Zuri put her mother's letters carefully in her pocket, pushed herself to her feet, and looked at the room one last time. The boxes, the packages, the organized evidence of a campaign that had been more sophisticated than either of them had fully understood until today. And she made a decision. She was going to carry the letters to her room. She was going to read them again, slowly, without the urgency of initial shock, and she was going to sit with what they contained. And then she was going to write back, not to make a point, not as a gesture for anyone to observe. Just because her mother had written 8 letters to a daughter she believed had stopped loving her, and that daughter was going to answer every single one, and whatever happened in the other rooms of this house tonight, and in the days that followed the meetings that were being arranged, the accounts being frozen, the separate, harder conversation Joon-seok was going to have with the people who had accepted his mother's information and used it, none of it was going to stop her from doing that one thing. She walked out of the room. Behind her, Joon-seok remained on the floor for another moment. He looked at the boxes his mother had stored with such careful, organized intention, and something passed through his face that had no name, or perhaps had too many names to settle on just one. Then he stood up, and he walked out of the room and closed the door quietly behind him and went to make the calls that could not be made in the same part of the house where his wife was writing. The calls Joon-seok made that afternoon lasted 6 hours. Zuri zeus this because she was in the bedroom writing letters to her mother when he started, and the lights outside the window had changed from the flat gray of late morning to the deep orange gray of early evening before she heard him stop. She heard the silence between calls brief, maybe 2 or 3 minutes, the sound of a man setting one thing down and picking up the next with the efficiency of someone who has converted grief into logistics and is going to stay in that conversion until the work is done. She wrote all 8 letters back, not long ones. She was not capable of long ones right now, not with her hands doing the slight unsteady thing they'd been doing since the storage room, but real ones. 1 paragraph each, sometimes 2, answering what her mother had asked about her life, about the house, about Joon-seok, saying the things she would have said if the original letters had reached her. She wrote them and folded them and addressed them, and then she put them in a stack on the nightstand and looked at them for a while. Then she went to find Mrs. O. Mrs. O was in the kitchen again. The mug was fresh this time. She had apparently decided that if she was going to spend the day in a state of suspended uncertainty, she was going to do it with warm tea. I need stamps, Zuri said. Mrs. O blinked. Stamps. Postage. For letters. Ah, yes. Of course. She opened a drawer and found a sheet of international postage stamps with the slightly frantic efficiency of someone very grateful to have a concrete task to perform. She held them out. Zuri took them. Thank you, Mrs. O hesitated. Mrs. Kang. Zuri turned back. I should have told him sooner. She said it fast, like something she'd been holding behind her teeth. Mr. Kang. I should have found a way to I knew it was wrong. I told myself I was protecting my position, protecting the other staff, but she stopped. That's not good enough. I know it's not good enough. Zuri looked at her. This woman who had stood at the edges of 2.5 years of her diminishment with the careful invisibility of someone who had decided that minimum viable witness was all she could offer. Who had once said, "You're not eating," again in a voice too quiet to be reported and just clear enough to mean something. No, Zuri said, it's not. Mrs. O absorbed this. But you told the truth when it mattered, Zuri said. You told the truth in the room when it was the harder option. I'm not going to pretend that cancels out the years. But I noticed. Mrs. O pressed her lips together and nodded. Zuri went to mail the letters. The evening settled over the estate with a specific tension that reminded her of the atmosphere before a storm, that particular compressed quality of air and light when the weather has made up its mind but hasn't yet acted on it. The household staff moved with the careful efficiency of people navigating a building whose floor plan has changed and hasn't yet been redrawn. The relatives who had been at the meeting that morning had either left the grounds or retreated to their quarters with the silence of people who understand that the current moment is not one in which voluntary visibility serves them. Hyrin had not reappeared. That absence had its own weight. Joon-seok came out of the study at 7:14. Zuri was in the sitting room adjacent to their bedroom when she heard his footsteps in the hall. A sound she had learned to identify within the first few months of living here, the particular rhythm of him, slightly heavier on the right. He opened the door, and she looked up from the chair she'd pulled to the window, and she could see immediately that the 6 hours had cost something. He looked like a man who had been in surgery. Not in the sense of injury, in the sense of the professional exhaustion of someone who has spent an extended period of time doing precise, consequential work that required the suspension of everything personal. He sat down on the edge of the bed across from her chair. Neither of them spoke immediately. Outside, the grounds were dark and the security lights had come on along the perimeter, throwing the garden into that particular combination of light and deep shadow that she had never quite gotten comfortable with. "Tell me," she said. He looked at the floor between them. The two associates, Kang Myung-jin and a man named Ro. They've been removed from their positions. Myung-jin had already heard something was coming. He'd made 2 calls this afternoon that confirmed he knew we were looking. He paused. He won't be a problem going forward. She didn't ask what that meant. She had promised herself she would ask only the questions whose answers she was prepared to carry. The information he had, Joon-seok continued. The things my mother gave him about the reorganization plans. There were 4 people I was planning to move out of current roles restructuring. Nothing punitive, just repositioning. Myung-jin was using that information to build leverage with those 4 people, to create a block. A quiet internal he stopped, started again. He was building something that would have been a problem when I moved forward with the reorganization. The plan was to have enough internal resistance aligned and organized before I knew what was happening. Zuri looked at him carefully. Your mother's information was meant to destabilize you. Yes. Did she know that's what Myung-jin would do with it? He looked up. That was the question. She could see. That was the one he had been turning over for 6 hours. I don't know, he said. I don't know if she understood what she was enabling, or if she thought she was only getting insurance and he was going to use it more quietly. I don't know if she thought about what came after, or if she was only thinking about protecting her position here. Does it matter? He considered. Legally? No. To me, he was quiet for a moment. I need it to matter. I need to know whether my mother looked at a man like Myung-jin and understood exactly what she was arming him with. Because those are different versions of her. And he stopped. I can only figure out what comes next if I know which version is true. Zuri thought about the storage room, the organized boxes, the rubber-banded letters in careful sequence. She's strategic, Zuri said. She understands cause and effect. She has never, in my experience, done something and not understood what it would produce. Joon-seok looked at his hands. Then she knew, he said. Neither of them said anything for a while. Then his phone rang. He looked at the screen, and his jaw tightened in a specific way she had not seen before. He showed her the screen. One word, mother. He answered it and put it on speaker, because there had been enough conversations in this house that didn't include both of them. I heard what happened today, Hyrin said. Her voice was different from the morning. Not broken, rearranged. She had been doing her own version of the afternoon, and whatever she'd done with her 6 hours had moved her from the controlled desperation of the meeting room into something harder. Resolved. I want to meet. You want to meet, Joon-seok said. Not here, not in this house, not with attorneys. A pause. Just you and me and Zuri. Somewhere that is not this building. Zuri and Joon-seok looked at each other. Tonight? He said. Yes, tonight. Another look between them. Zuri gave a small nod. The restaurant on the 3rd level of the Mayhem building, Joon-seok said. 1 hour. The line went quiet. Then 1 hour. She hung up. They looked at each other in the silence left behind. Do you want to go? He asked. He asked it genuinely, not as a formality, but as a real question, with her actual answer mattering to the outcome. She thought about it for exactly 3 seconds. I want to end it, she said. Whatever ending is available tonight. I want to be in the room for it. He nodded. They got ready in near silence, side by side, in the quiet efficiency of two people who have reached the point in a crisis where talking about what's happening has been replaced by simply moving through it. She changed her clothes. He changed his. She looked at herself in the mirror for a moment and found that her face looked different than it had this morning, not older, not harder, exactly. More settled. Like a structure that has been tested and found the edge of its own endurance and returned from that edge with better information about where its walls actually were. The drive was 20 minutes. The restaurant was the kind of place where business happened, rather than food being the point, private enough, quiet enough, with booths designed to contain conversations that needed to stay in the room. The maitre d' recognized Joon-seok and said nothing that was not necessary. They were taken to a corner table. Hai-rin was already there. She was seated facing the door, which Zuri noted. A person who needs to see who is coming. She had changed as well, a different dark dress. Her composure reinstated to its surface level. Her hands folded in the posture Zuri had come to understand was her architecture of control. But something underneath it was different. The something underneath it was different. The specific difference who has made a decision and is now living in the first minutes of having made it. Joon-seok sat across from her. Zuri sat beside Joon-seok. A waiter appeared. Joon-seok sent him away with a look. Hai-rin looked at Zuri first. That was the first departure from the script. Zuri she had assumed Joon-seok would be the primary address. I owe you an explanation, Hai-rin said. You owe me a lot more than that, Zuri said. But I'll hear the explanation. Something moved across Hai-rin's face. Not offense, something more complicated than offense. I was afraid, she said. I want to say that first, because everything else comes from it, and I won't make sense without it. Neither Joon-seok nor Zuri spoke. When your father died, Hai-rin said to Joon-seok, you were 19. You know what happened after. You know what you had to become, and how fast you had to become it. What you may not understand is what it did to me watching you become that. The speed of it, the necessity of it. Her voice was steady, but its steadiness was effortful in a way that was new, at least in Zuri's experience of her. I built my life around this family, around your father, and then around you. And when you were 19 and you had to take over something that men twice your age had built, I told myself that as long as I stayed close, as long as I managed this household and these people and the 100 small things that don't look important until they go wrong, that was how I protected you. Joon-seok looked at her. I know, he said. I have never treated that as a small thing. I told you that. You brought her home, Hai-rin said. The sentence landed simply. Just those 4 words. You brought her home, and everything I had built my usefulness around, everything that made me matter in this house, had someone else to do it. Someone younger. Someone who would be here after I was no longer relevant. She looked at Zuri. It was not about you. Not at first. It was about what you represented. The end of your position, Zuri said. Yes. So, you manufactured a version of me that made your position necessary, Zuri said. You made me incompetent by exclusion. You made me isolated by design. You made sure I appeared to not want to be part of this family, and then you were necessary to manage the family in my absence. Hai-rin held her gaze. Yes, and when I didn't leave, Zuri said, and when I didn't break down, and when I kept coming to dinner and sitting at the table every night, even when the food was cold, you escalated. Yes. And Myung-jin, Joon-seok said. His voice had changed. It was back to the quiet that was not calm. Tell me about Myung-jin. Hai-rin turned him. He came to me 8 months ago. He already knew about the accounts, the estate expenditures I hadn't disclosed. I don't know how he found out. He said he would bring it to you, unless I gave him something useful in return. Joon-seok went very still. He blackmailed you, Zuri said. Yes. Hai-rin said it without flinching. He threatened to expose the accounts, and I gave him what he asked for. Information about the reorganization. Your schedule. 3 times over 8 months. You could have come to me, Joon-seok said. Quiet. Terrible in its quietness. And told you what? That I had been hiding expenditures for 6 years? That a man inside your organization had found out and was using it against me? She looked at her son. I was afraid of what you would do. More afraid of me than of what you were doing to this family. Yes, she said it without deflection. That is the truth. I was more afraid of your response than of the damage I was causing. And I am telling you that now not as an excuse, but because you asked me to tell you the truth. And the truth is that I chose the wrong fear. I was afraid of the wrong thing. The restaurant was quiet around them. At a table near the bar, two men in suits were eating dinner and not looking in their direction. The waiter had found something to do on the other side of the room and was doing it with commitment. Joon-seok leaned back in his chair. He looked at his mother across the table, with the expression of a man who is holding a tremendous weight and has decided that the only thing to do with it is to keep holding it rather than put it down somewhere. It might cause damage. The accounts, he said. What was in the accounts? Hiren straightened slightly. Transfers to my sister's family. Over 6 years. They were in financial difficulty, and I chose not to ask your permissions, because I knew... You knew I would have said yes, Joon-seok said. A beat. Yes, Hiren said. You knew I would have said yes, he repeated. And you hid it anyway. I did not want to be the person who had to ask, she said. I did not want to be in the position of needing your permission for something I had decided. I am your mother. I ran this household before. You were the man who ran this organization. And I could not... Her voice did the thing for the first time. Just slightly. She pulled it back. I could not make myself be the person who has to ask her son for money. The silence that followed was a different kind than all the previous silences of the evening. It was the silence of something true being said, not comfortable or exonerating, but true. The kind of truth that doesn't make things better, but at least stops them from being built on something false. Zuri looked at Hiren. She looked at her, really looked, the way she hadn't permitted herself to in 2.5 years, because looking required a kind of acknowledgement she had not been willing to give. She looked at a woman who was 62 years old and had spent 40 of those years building her identity around a family structure that her son's success had made both more secure and more precarious. A woman who had made fear into strategy and strategy into cruelty and had done it so gradually and so carefully that by the time it had become undeniably cruel, the architecture of it was too integrated into the structure of the house to remove without taking walls down. She did not feel sympathy. She registered the human dimensions of it without feeling sympathy. There was a difference. You still haven't answered for my mother, Zuri said. Hiren looked at her. Everything else, you've explained the fear, the position, Myungjin. I can follow the logic of it even when I think the logic is wrong. But my mother, Zuri put both hands flat on the table. My mother lost her husband, and then she lost her daughter. And she lost her daughter because you told your stuff to say I was unavailable. And you let her conclude she'd been cut off. What was the strategic logic of that? What were you protecting? Hiren held her gaze for a moment. I was removing your exit, she said. The word sat on the table between them, like something physical. If you had your mother, Hiren said, you had somewhere to go. You had someone outside this house who would ask questions. Who would come if you called? Who would give you the ability to leave without losing everything? She paused. If you had no one, you had to make this work. You had to find a way to exist inside this house because there was nothing else. You needed me trapped, Zuri said. I needed you to stay, Hiren said. Those are the same thing. Hiren did not disagree. Joon-seok's chair scraped back slightly, not dramatically an inch. The specific movement of a body that needs to create a small amount of additional distance from what it is hearing. He said nothing. He was looking at the table. Zuri could see his hands, and his hands were very still in the way that things are still when they are being held still rather than simply resting. You needed her trapped, Joon-seok said finally to the table. Then he looked up. She is my wife. She is in my house, in my name, in a life that is she gave up a life to be here. She gave up a career and a cities and her proximity to her family to be in a house that you turned into a box she couldn't find the edges of. He looked at his mother. And you did it on purpose. You did it with planning and intention because you were afraid of what would happen to your position. Yes, Hiren said. Yes, he said it back to her like a door closing. You understand that there is no version of that explanation that makes it acceptable. I know. I need you to not say you know unless you mean it, he said. I need you to actually understand what you did not in the abstract, not in the language of strategic decisions and family protection. I need you to understand that you took a woman's mother away from her, that you made my wife lie awake in that house and wonder if her own mother had decided she was not worth reaching out to anymore, that you manufactured loneliness with the specific purpose of ensuring she had no one. His voice did not rise. It did not need to. Do you understand that? Hyren's eyes had gone bright again. This time she did not pull them back. I understand it, she said. Do you understand that understanding it doesn't fix it? Yes. Do you understand that I don't know, I genuinely do not know what I'm supposed to do with a mother who did this? Who I can look at right now and see the fear that drove it, and the grief underneath, still understand and send Munwin that none of that changes what was done in this house with my name on it. His voice cracked, just at the end, just on the word name. He caught it and held it, and it did not happen again, but Zuri had heard it, and Hyren had heard it, and the sound of it changed the room entirely, because it was the first real fracture in him since the dining room. The first where the structure had given, slightly under what it was carrying. Hyren reached across the table. She put her hand on her son's hand. He did not pull away. He also did not turn his hand over to receive hers. He sat with her hand on top of his, and he looked at it, and Zuri watched his face do something that she thought might be the hardest thing she had watched him do, yet hold the contradiction of a man who is furious and grieved, and still, underneath all of it, in the oldest and least negotiable part of himself, someone's son. I'm going to say something, Hyren said, and she was not looking at Joon-seok anymore. She was looking at Zuri. Zuri waited. I am going to tell you the truth about this, Hyren said. And the truth is not pretty, and it does not make me look like a woman who deserves forgiveness. But you ask me for the truth, and I am going to give it to you, because you are the only person in this situation who has not. She stopped. Restarted. You are the only person in any of this who conducted yourself with something I recognize as integrity. And you deserve the truth from me, even when the truth makes me a villain in it. Zuri said nothing. I did not start out wanting to hurt you, Hyren said. I started out wanting to protect a position. But there is a thing that happens. She paused, as if the sentence was giving her difficulty from the inside. There is a thing that happens when you have been doing something harmful for long enough that it becomes ordinary. You stop asking whether it's right. You start asking whether it's working. And if it's working, you optimize it. You find the next lever. You pull the next thread. Her eyes had not left Zuri's. I stopped seeing you as a person I was harming and started seeing you as a problem I was managing. And that is the thing I most need you to know that I understand. That you were never a problem. You were a person, and I treated you like a problem for 2.5 years. The restaurant was completely quiet around them. Zuri breathed through her nose. She thought about the storage room, the 8 letters. Her mother's voice on the phone doing the work of sound steady. She thought about the first dinner, the cold plate, the specific quality of Hyren's inattention as she turned back to the table. She thought about all the ways she had minimized it to herself, told herself she was being paranoid, reminded herself that Joon-seok was happy and the house was safe, and that was what mattered. She thought about the girl she had been. Before she came here, the one with the career and the apartment and the Saturday mornings when she called her mother, and they talked for an hour about nothing important, which was everything. She said, that's not forgiveness. Hyren absorbed this. What you just said to me, it's true, and it matters that you said it. But I need you to know that hearing it doesn't make me okay. It doesn't give me back the 2 years. I thought my mother didn't want to talk to me. It doesn't give her back the 2 years she spent wondering what she'd done wrong. Zuri kept her voice even. It cost something. She paid it. So if you're telling me the truth because you want absolution, I can't give you that tonight. Maybe not ever. And I'm not going to pretend otherwise to make this easier. I'm not asking for absolution, Hyren said. Then what are you asking for? Hyren took her hand off Joon-seok's. She straightened. She looked at her daughter-in-law across a restaurant table and said, with the care of a woman who understands that the words coming out of her mouth right now are the only honest currency she has left. I'm asking for the chance to change what comes next. Not to undo what happened. To change what comes next. Zuri looked at her. Joon-seok looked at neither of them. He was looking at the middle distance, the place a person looks when they are holding something that is too big for direct examination and must be approached from a slight angle. That's not my decision alone, Zuri said finally. Hyrin nodded. One small, genuine nod. And it's not tonight's decision, Zuri continued. Tonight you can understand that you hurt me. You can understand the shape of what you did and why it was wrong and how far the damage went. But whether there's anything after that, she looked at the woman across the table. That is something that happens through behavior, not through conversations, not through explanations. I understand, Hyrin said. Zuri believed her. She did not know yet what she was going to do with that belief. What she did know, sitting in a restaurant booth at 9 p.m. with her husband's composure showing its first cracks, and her mother-in-law's composure showing its last, was that she was tired. Not the soft tiredness of a long day, but the deep, specific exhaustion of someone who has been holding a tremendous weight in secret for a very long time, and has finally today set it down somewhere that is not her alone. The weight was not gone. It was distributed now, which was different. The shape of it had changed. Some of it belonged to Joon-seok, and some to Hyrin, and some of it would never fully leave her, but it no longer lived only in her body, only in the 3 a.m. dark, only in the practiced stillness of her face at a dinner table. They left the restaurant at 9:47. The drive back was quiet. Not uncomfortable, the quiet of people who have said the necessary things and don't need to fill the space left behind them. They were halfway back to the estate when Joon-seok's phone rang again. He looked at the screen and his posture changed in a way she had not seen before, a physical rearrangement that was not fear, because she did not believe she had ever seen him afraid, but something adjacent to it. Something that looked like a man whose body has just received information before his mind has. He answered it. She watched his face. She watched it go through 3 distinct changes in the space of 45 seconds. The first was a form of controlled attention, a man receiving information and processing it. The second was something she had no word for, something that moved in the muscles around his eyes and his jaw, and was gone before it could be named. The third was the stillness, the deep, total, frightening stillness. He said, when? A pause. Don't touch anything. I'll be there in 12 minutes. He hung up. He looked straight ahead at the road. What happened? Zuri said. Not a question. A demand that he tell her, because she was done, she had decided, in the storage room, in the restaurant, across every table and hallway, and dark bedroom of this house, with being the last person to know what was happening in her own life. He turned to look at her. Myung-jin, he said. He moved faster than we expected. Her hands went flat on her knees. What did he do? He went to 3 of the 4 people I was planning to move in the reorganization. Tonight, after he knew we were looking at him. He paused. He told them that I was not repositioning them. He told them I was removing them. Permanently. Zuri understood the weight of permanently in this context. He told them you were going to have them killed, she said. Yes, and they believed him. One of them reached out to a contact outside the organization to discuss protective options, Joon-seok said. That contact is not. That contact is someone whose involvement changes the complexity of this situation significantly. She looked at him. How significantly? The car turned. The estate gates came into view. The Mayim Group, he said. The contact is someone affiliated with the Mayim Group. She did not know the name. She understood from his face that not knowing it was, until this moment, a protection she had been afforded and was no longer going to be able to have. Tell me what that means, she said. He pulled through the gates. He looked at her. It means that what started as a family matter this morning has become, tonight, a problem that lives in a part of my world that does not have clean solutions. He stopped the car in front of the house. And it means that I need to go deal with it right now. And I need you to stay in this house. And I need you to trust me. She looked at his face in the half-light of the estate's security lamps. She thought about everything she had learned about trust in the last 24 hours. The things trust assumed, the things it required, the things it cost when its assumptions turned out to have been managed rather than earned. She also thought about the man in front of her who had come home through the dark hallway last night and had stood in a doorway and seen the truth and had not looked away from it, who had sat on the floor of a storage room beside her with someone else's letters in his lap, who had let his voice crack in a restaurant booth because the sound of his own name in the sentence his mother had built around his wife was more than the structure could hold without showing the seam. "How long?" she said. "I don't know." "Will you call me?" "Yes." She looked at him for another moment. "Go," she said. He got out of the car. He handed the keys to a security man who had materialized from the dark beside the driveway. He turned to look at her once through the car window, just once, just for a second, and then he walked toward the group of men waiting near the east entrance, and the night folded around him the way it folds around things that belong to it. Zuri sat in the stopped car alone. The security lamps threw their flat light across the front of the house. Every window she could see from the car was lit, the estate awake and tense and full of people recalibrating in the aftermath of a day that had restructured everything they thought they knew about their positions here. She got out of the car. She walked into the house. She went up the stairs and to the sitting room with the window that looked out at the garden, and she sat down in the same chair she'd been in earlier, in the same position, and she looked out at the dark garden and she waited. At 11:15, her phone rang. Joon-seok's name on the screen. She answered immediately. "I'm here," she said. Static. Movement. Then his voice, and it was not the contained, quiet, controlled voice of every version of him she had encountered today. It was something rougher than that, something that had been worn down to its actual surface. "We have a problem," he said. "Tell me." Mung-jin had documentation, he said. "Not just about my reorganization plans, about the original arrangement, the estate, my mother's expenditures." A pause. She heard something in the background voices, movement. He had documentation that goes further back than 8 months. "What he told me tonight, what he showed me." Another pause. "Zuri, the communication with my mother didn't start 8 months ago. It started 3 years ago." The sitting room went very cold. "3 years ago," she said. "Just before I brought you home," he said. "Just before that October." She stopped breathing for a moment. "He's been connected to her since the beginning," she said. "Yes." She stood up from the chair without meaning to. She was standing at the window with her hand on the glass, the same way Joon-seok had stood in the east wing that morning, one hand flat against a surface as if checking whether it was still solid. "Joon-seok, if the connection started 3 years ago, if Myung-jin has been in contact with your mother since before I arrived, then what happened to you in this house was not only my mother's idea," he said. She heard him say it. She heard the shape of what it meant. "Myung-jin needed you isolated," she said. Her own voice sounded strange to her, far away, coming from a place past the normal range of emotion into something colder and more structural. "He needed me isolated, and he needed your mother invested in the isolation. Because a wife with outside connections, with her own influence in the household, with her mother's phone calls and your attention on the inside of your own house, that was a liability. That was someone who might see things, who might tell you things. Who might." She stopped. "He used your mother's fear," she said. "He didn't create it. The fear was already there. But he found it, and he gave it a strategy. He showed her how to use it." Joon-seok was quiet on the other end of the phone. "Is she in danger?" Zuri asked. "She's at the estate," he said. "Stay near the interior rooms. Security detail is being tripled in the next hour." "Is she in danger?" Zuri asked again. Another pause. "I don't know yet," he said. The line was quiet for a moment. "There's one more thing," Joon-seok said. His voice had changed again, lower, something underneath it that she had not heard before. Something that was not fear in the ordinary sense, but was perhaps what fear looked like when it had been stripped of all its usual disguises and was presenting itself in its actual form. "The Mayhem Group contact, the one that my associate reached out to tonight for protective options." "Yes," she said. "His name is Song Hyun-wook," Joon-seok said. "He runs 3 businesses in the Northern District, and he has been for the last 18 months he has been building a case." Not a legal case, a strategic one, against my organization. She held the phone against her ear and looked out at the dark garden and the security lights and the tall iron of the perimeter fence that had always been. She understood now in a new way, much about keeping things inside as keeping them out. He's been waiting for a destabilization event, Joon-seok said. Something internal. Something that would create enough disruption in my organization that the moment he moved, the response would be, the word he did not say, sat in the air between them with perfect clarity. Fractured. Myung-jin was building the destabilization event, Zuri said. That's what the internal block was for. That's what the 4 associates were for. If he could turn them against you, if he could convince them you were planning to remove them permanently, he could create enough internal fracture that when Song moved minus... Yes, Joon-seok said. And your mother's information about the reorganizations, was the fuel he said. Yes. She stood at the window in the cold room and she understood with the specific clarity of someone who has just received the last piece of a picture they have been building all day, the full shape of what had been constructed around her life, around both their lives, around the house that she had moved into on a cold October day 3 years ago, and had understood immediately to be a place with a particular kind of silence in its walls. That silence had not been the ordinary silence of family politics and in-law resentments. It had been, underneath all of those things, the silence of a house that had been compromised from a particular direction, by a particular hand, for a particular set of reasons that had nothing to do with cold food, and everything to do with the fact that the right wife connected and present and noticed would have seen things that the people who needed Joon-seok blind could not afford to have seen. They had needed her isolated. They had found the perfect instrument to isolate her. They had given that instrument a reason to work very hard. And it had worked. For 3 years it had worked. Until a meeting ended early. Until a man came home through the dark on a rainy night and stood in a doorway and saw the truth. What do you need from me? She asked. She heard him take a breath on the other end. Nothing yet, he said. Stay safe. Let me work. Joon-seok. Yes. When this is over, she stopped. Started again. When this is over, I need us to talk about what the rest of this looks like. Not just your mother. Not just the organization. The whole thing. What this house is. What we are inside it. Because I can't... Her voice found the edge of itself and she managed it. I need it to be different. Not just better. Different. A pause. Yes, he said. I know. Promise me. I promise, he said. And then quieter. I'm coming back. She nodded, which was a useless thing to do on the phone, and she said, I know, because she had chosen to know it, chosen to believe it, the way you choose to stand on a floor you have tested and found to be solid, even after it has shown you. He came back at 3:47 in the morning. Zuri heard the car before she heard the door, the specific sound of tires on the estate's stone drive, slower than usual, the engine cutting out in a way that felt deliberate. She had been in the sitting room chair for 4 hours, not sleeping, not quite awake, existing in the specific state of suspended attention that the body adopts when it has been told to wait for something it cannot predict. She had the lamp on low. Her mother's letters were on the side table beside the chair, reread twice more in the dark. She heard the front door. She heard footsteps that were heavier than when he had left not injured. She told herself she would have heard something if he were injured. There would have been a different quality to the arrival, but waited in the way footsteps get when the hours between departure and return have cost something real. He appeared in the doorway of the sitting room. He was still in the same clothes. His jacket was gone. His collar was open. There was nothing on him that looked like damage in the physical sense, but his face had the quality of a room after a fire, structurally intact, recognizably itself, but fundamentally altered at the level of its interior. He looked at her in the chair. She looked at him in the doorway. Sit down, she said. He came in and sat on the edge of the bed, forearms on his knees, and was quiet for a moment. She did not rush it. She had learned, in 3 years of this marriage, that some things needed their own time to come out, and pushing them produced a worse version of what waiting would eventually deliver on its own. Myung-jin is handled, he said. She waited. Song Hyun-wook made contact tonight. Directly. He had been expecting the internal disruption to be further along before he moved, but Myung-jin panicked when he understood we were looking at him and moved too fast. Joon-seok looked at the floor. Song is not interested in a war. He was interested in an advantage. When the advantage evaporated, when the internal block didn't materialize, he retreated. He'll move again eventually, when conditions are better for him. But not tonight. Tonight is done. And the 4 associates. 3 of them are back in line. 1 resigned. He paused. That's acceptable. She looked at him. And Myung-jin. He looked up. He is no longer in a position to cause problems. She held his gaze for a moment, reading the exact calibration of what that meant, the specific place it lived on the spectrum between removed from power and other things she had promised herself she would not ask him to detail. She found what she needed in his face, not comfort, exactly, but the confirmation that her promise to Hyrin had been honored, that nothing permanent had been done, that she would have to carry differently than what she was already carrying. Okay, she said. He looked at her for a moment. You're not going to ask. I asked you before you left, she said. You made me a promise. I'm choosing to trust it. Something moved across his face. Not relief. Relief was too simple for what it was. More like the specific feeling of a person who has been braced for a particular kind of judgment and has found dalsmalt, kind instead a particular kind of faith, and the finding of it is both better and more serious than anticipated. Your mother, she said. What does she know about Myung-jin's involvement from the beginning? He was quiet for a moment. She knew he was giving her a strategy. She understood his guidance was self-interested. I think she allowed herself not to examine how self-interested because the strategy was giving her what she wanted. He paused. She did not know the full scope. She did not know Song Hyun-wook. She did not understand she was being used as a component in something much larger than household politics. But she cooperated with someone who was working against you, Zuri said. Yes. Even without knowing the full scope, she accepted guidance from a man inside your organization about how to manage your wife, and she didn't ask enough questions about why he cared. Yes, he said. And you... She stopped. What are you going to do with that? He looked at his hands. I don't know yet. And I'm choosing not to decide tonight, because the decisions I make tonight will be made by a man who has been awake for 22 hours, dealing with things that required a version of me I don't want making. Permanent decisions about my mother. He looked up. Tomorrow, when I can think straight. She nodded. Come to bed, she said. He looked at her for a moment, with the expression of a man who has been given something simple and is aware enough of the day he has just survived to understand that simple is exactly what he needs. He came to bed. She turned off the lamp. In the dark, he said, I'm going to fix this. I know, she said, all of it. I know. A pause. I don't know how yet. I know that too, she said. He was asleep in 11 minutes. She could tell by the change in his breathing, the slow, total release of someone whose body has simply made the decision for them. She lay beside him in the dark and listened to the estate settle around them, the subtle sounds of a large house adjusting to the night, and she thought about the shape of the next few months, which she could not see clearly, but could feel the general weight of the way you feel a season changing before the temperature has fully committed. She fell asleep with her mother's letters on the nightstand and the lamp off and the perimeter lights outside, throwing their flat security glow through the curtains and across the ceiling like something that was trying to look like daylight and wasn't quite managing it. She slept. 3 weeks passed before the banquet. In those 3 weeks, the estate went through a transformation that was partly logistical and partly something harder to name, the specific process of a household learning new rules. Relatives who had lived there in John 666 resources began the process of relocating, some with more grace than others. The cousin Sung Yan left voluntarily and sent Zuri a text 2 days before he left that said only, I should have said something sooner. I'm sorry. She read it and wrote back, I know. Thank you. And meant both. Park Soo-jin left without a word of acknowledgement, and Zuri had not expected one and was not surprised by its absence. The household accounts passed to Zuri's management, which was a practical thing and also an enormous thing, the daily evidence that the structure of the house had genuinely changed. that she was not in it as a guest being managed, but as its actual primary authority. She discovered she was good at it. She had not particularly expected to discover that, but she was organized by nature, and the staff responded to her directness with the specific relief of people who have been navigating an ambiguous power structure and have been handed something clear. Mrs. O remained. On her third day managing the household accounts, Zuri called Mrs. O into the small office off the kitchen and sat her down and looked at her across the deck, said, "I want you to tell me everything you know. Not as a punishment, not to build a case. I want to know what happened in this house from your perspective, because you were here for all of it, and I was the person it was happening to, and I only have one angle." Mrs. O looked at her for a long moment. Then she started talking. She talked for 2 hours. Some of what she said Zuri already knew. Some of it she had suspected. A small but significant portion of it was new, the texture of it, the daily grain of how Hyrin's management of the household had operated, the small adjustments and pressures and communications that had never been visible from where Zuri stood. By the end of the 2 hours, Zuri had a complete picture. Not a comfortable one, but complete. "Why are you telling me all of this?" Zuri said, "when you protected it for so long?" Mrs. O thought about it. "Because you asked me to," she said. "And because no one ever asked me to. Not once, in all of it, did anyone ask me what I thought about what was happening." She looked at Zuri. "I thought that meant my opinion didn't count. Now I think it means everyone was too invested in the outcome to want to hear from someone who might complicate it." "Your opinion counts," Zuri said. Mrs. O looked like she didn't know what to do with that, which Zuri understood. Joon-seok had the conversation with his mother 6 days after the night at the restaurant. Zuri was not present for it. She had been asked whether she wanted to be, and she had thought about it carefully, and she had said no, because there were things that needed to happen between a son and his mother that did not need her in the room. And she had enough to carry without also carrying the weight of witnessing Joon-seok navigate the grief of that conversation in real time. She trusted him to have it. She trusted herself to hear about it after. He told her about it that evening, sitting at the kitchen table with the kind of informality they were developing between them. Now the two of them in the kitchen, at odd hours, without the formality of the dining room or the sitting room, because informal spaces had started to feel safer. She understood about Myungjin, he said. She accepted that she had been used without fully understanding what she was being used for. She did not try to minimize her role in it. He wrapped both hands around his coffee mug. She said she knew she was accepting help that came with strings. She wasn't examining closely enough. She said she told herself it didn't matter what his reasons were as long as the outcome served her. "That's honest," Zuri said. "It is," he said. "She is whatever else she is. She is not a person who lies to herself indefinitely. Eventually, she arrives at the truth. It just sometimes takes years and a catastrophe." Zuri considered this. "What did you decide?" He looked at his coffee. "She will not live in this house. Not going forward. I'm setting her up in a property that is comfortable and is entirely hers, not connected to estate accounts, not contingent on anything. It belongs to her. Her finances are separate and sufficient, and she will not have to ask me for anything." He paused. "She will not have authority over this household, or anyone in it. Those decisions are yours. And your relationship with her?" He was quiet for a moment. "I am not removing her from my life. She is my mother, but the version of her that existed in this house, that had authority over this household, and the people in it that is over. What we are to each other after that is something that will have to be rebuilt, if it can be rebuilt, from a different foundation than the one we've been using." Zuri nodded slowly. "Are you at peace with that?" she asked. He looked at her. "No, but I think I can be eventually. Peace isn't where I am right now." He paused. "Right now I'm somewhere between grief and determination, which is probably the honest place to be." She reached across the table and put her hand on his. He turned his over. They sat like that for a while in the kitchen of a house that was becoming, slowly and with genuine effort and not without difficulty, a different place than it had been. The banquet was Hyrin's idea. Zuri had not expected that. She had expected Hyrin to go quietly to move to the new property with the pride of a woman who accepts defeat without commentary. When the request came, through Joon-seok, for a final formal family gathering at the estate before the transition, Zuri had held it in her hands for 2 days before answering. She said yes. The gathering was smaller than the formal family dinners had been. The relatives who remained in any kind of relationship with the family, the ones who had apologized, the ones who had at minimum acknowledged what had happened, without excusing themselves from it, sat at the long dining table that Zuri had learned to navigate like a minefield, and was only now beginning to see as just a table. Hyrin arrived early. She was in the kitchen when Zuri came down. She was standing at the counter, not as a guest, not as the mistress of the household. She was standing there in the simple way of someone who is present in a space because they want to do a specific thing, and that thing requires this space. In front of her were the ingredients for the meal she was preparing to serve. Fresh. Everything fresh. Vegetables chosen from the estate garden that morning. Meat from the butcher Zuri had learned was the household's actual preferred source before budget adjustments from the estate accounts had quietly redirected things. The preparation was serious and careful, and had clearly begun hours before Zuri walked in. Zuri stopped in the kitchen doorway. Hyrin looked up. Neither of them spoke for a moment. "I didn't ask anyone to help me," Hyrin said. "I wanted to do this myself." Zuri looked at the counter. At the organized, fresh, genuinely good food being prepared with evident skill and care by the woman who had, for 2.5 years, ordered cold leftovers delivered to the chair at the end of the table. "Okay," she said. "I know it doesn't." Hyrin started, then stopped. She started again. "I know this doesn't undo it." "No," Zuri said. "I'm not doing it to undo it." "I know," Zuri said. "I can see that. See that." Hyrin looked at her with the expression of a woman who is holding something that she has been holding for weeks and is not sure whether to put it down or keep holding it. "May I ask you something?" Zuri leaned against the doorframe. "Yes, your mother," Hyrin said. "Is she?" She paused. "Does she know the full extent of what was done?" "Yes," Zuri said. "How is she?" Zuri thought about the 4 phone calls she and Beverly had had in the past 3 weeks. The long one on the second day, where Beverly had done most of the talking and had covered, in her precise and unhurried way, every stage of her response to what had been done to her, the grief, the anger, the particular quality of fury that a mother carries when she understands. Her child was isolated deliberately. The shorter calls after that, which had been more like the calls they used to have. The conversation about Beverly's neighbor's dog, and the television program, and the Atlanta weather, and underneath all of it, the rebuilt structure of something that had been interrupted and was now, slowly, carefully, resuming. "She's herself," Zuri said, "which is the best possible answer." Hyrin nodded. She looked back at the food she was preparing. "She would be within her rights to want to speak to me," she said. If you ever thought it would help anything. "I would do that." Zuri looked at her. "I'll ask her," she said. "I'm not going to make that decision for her." "No," Hyrin said. "Of course not." Zuri pushed off the doorframe. She came into the kitchen all the way in, not stopping at the counter's edge, all the way to the other side, where the second preparation surface was, and she picked up the cutting board that was sitting there, and the knife beside it. She looked at the vegetables waiting to be used. Hyrin watched her. Zuri picked up a vegetable and started cutting. Neither of them spoke for a while. The kitchen had its sounds, the knife on the board, the burner Hyrin had on low, the early evening settling in through the window above the sink that misses. O had stood at 3 weeks ago with a cold mug and the expression of someone waiting for a verdict. "You didn't have to do that," Hyrin said. "The vegetable. The cutting board. The helping." "I know," Zuri said. "Why did you?" Zuri thought about it while she cut. "Because I'm not interested in performing punishment," she said finally. "I'm interested in what comes next. And what comes next looks like this, like 2 people in a kitchen doing the work." She looked at Hyrin. "Not because everything is fine. It isn't. But because standing outside the kitchen doing nothing doesn't move anything forward." Hyrin was quiet for a moment. "You are very different from what I expected when Joon-seok brought you here," she said. "I know," Zuri said. "That was part of your problem." Hyrin made a sound that was not quite a laugh. There was something in it, not humor, but its cousin. The sound a person makes when something lands true, even when the truth is uncomfortable. They finished preparing the meal together. The banquet, when it happened, was not the tense formals exercise Zuri had prepared herself for. It was smaller and quieter than the family dinners of the previous 3 years, fewer people, less performance. The particular quality of a gathering where everyone present has recently been through something that has stripped the social furniture from the room and left only actual people. Joon-seok sat beside Zuri at the center of the table. Not at the head, the center. He had arranged the seating himself, which she had noticed and understood. The serving dishes were placed at the center of the table. When Hyrin carried the first one out from the kitchen, carrying it herself to the table, setting it down with the care of someone who is making a statement through action rather than words, the room noticed. No one commented. That was the right response. Comments would have made it ceremonial when what it needed to be was real. Hyrin brought out the dishes. Then she sat at the table. Not at the head. She sat in the middle of one side, between two relatives, and she reached for the serving spoon with everyone else. Zuri watched this from her seat. Then she reached for the serving dish nearest to her and helped herself and passed it to Joon-seok beside her, and he took it and helped himself and passed it on. And the table moved the way a table moves, when people are simply eating together, the ordinary human mechanics of it, the passing and the receiving, the small negotiations of space and preference that happen when a group of people share food without hierarchy, directing who gets what. The dinner was good. It was genuinely, uncomplicatedly good. Zuri ate 2 full plates, which was something she would not have done 3 weeks ago at this table, and she did not think about it analytically or experience it as symbolic. She was just hungry, and the food was excellent, and she ate. At some point during the meal, she became aware that Joon-seok was watching her. She looked at him. He had the expression she had first catalogued in the car 3 weeks ago, before the phone call, the one that contained too many things to name individually, and resolved them all into something that looked simple from the outside, and was not. He was watching her eat at his table, in her seat, with her full plate, and his face was doing what faces do when a person is sitting inside something they spent a long time being afraid they would never have. She looked at him and raised an eyebrow slightly, which meant what? He shook his head slightly, which meant nothing in the way, that nothing sometimes means everything, but not right now. She went back to her food. Under the table, his hand found hers. She let it. After dinner, when the relatives had shifted to the sitting rooms and the staff was beginning the quiet work of clearing the table, Hyrin came to where Zuri was, standing near the window with a cup of tea she hadn't drunk yet. She stood beside her. They were quiet for a moment. Then Hyrin said, "I want to ask you something, and I need you to tell me honestly if it is something you don't want to do." "Ask," Zuri said. Your mother Hyrin held her own cup in both hands. "I would like to call her, not to explain myself, or to ask her to forgive what I did. I understand that what I did to her relationship with you, is not something she owes me forgiveness for." She paused. "I would like to call her to tell her the truth. The full truth, in her own language if she'll allow me to use a translator, so that she knows from me directly what happened and why. So that she doesn't have to carry, so that there's no version of events she's wondering about." She looked at Zuri. She deserves to hear it from the source. Zuri looked at her. She thought about Beverly Bennett sitting in her apartment in Atlanta, who had spent 2 years conducting herself with a dignity she had not needed to maintain because the situation was dignified, who had stopped calling her daughter not out of indifference, but out of the specific consideration of a woman who believed she was being told her calls were unwanted, and had decided that love meant respecting that, who had written 8 letters and received no response, and eventually concluded that silence was the response. "I'll ask her," Zuri said. "I'll tell her what you said, and I'll let her decide. That's all I'm asking, Hyrin." Zuri turned to look at her directly. If she says no, that's the end of it. No second request. "Yes," Hyrin said. "I understand she meant it." Zuri could see that she meant it, And she added that to the collection of small, real things that had accumulated over the past 3 weeks, the things that were not reconciliation, because reconciliation was too large and too simple, a word for the actual texture of what was being built between them, which was slower and more conditional and more honest than reconciliation implied. Beverly said yes. The call happened 4 days later, with a translator present, and Zuri in the room at Beverly's request. I want you there, baby. Not so I need backup, just so you know exactly what was said, and it lasted 45 minutes. Hyrin said everything she had said at the restaurant, and more. She did not soften the timeline. She did not present her fear as an excuse. She said she had made deliberate choices to prevent a mother from reaching her daughter, and she understood what that meant, and she was telling Beverly directly because Beverly deserved to have the truth delivered by the person who had made those choices rather than reconstructed from secondhand accounts. Beverly listened. She asked 2 questions, clear, precise questions, asked in the voice of a woman who has decided that if she is going to hear this, she's going to hear all of it and understand it completely. Hyrin answered both questions without deflection. When it was over, Beverly said, "I appreciate you calling me." Then she said, "Don't contact me again." Hyrin said, "I understand." The call ended. Zuri looked at her mother on the screen. Beverly's expression was the one she used when she had processed something and arrived at a position and did not intend to revisit it. "You okay?" Zuri asked. "I'm fine," Beverly said. "I got what I needed from that." Which was the truth from the source. Beverly looked at her daughter. "I didn't need her to be sorry. I needed to know what happened so I could put it in the right place in my head. Now I know. Now I can do that. And the no contact? She wanted to do something for me. I let her." Beverly's voice was even. "But I don't have anything to build with that woman, Zuri. And pretending I do would be doing it for your comfort, not mine. And I'm too old to do things for other people's comfort." "Good," Zuri said. Beverly looked at her for a moment. "You know what I saw on that call?" "What?" "A woman who is scared of becoming nothing," Beverly said. "That's what all of it came from. Fear of becoming nothing. And she made my daughter carry that fear for 2 years because she couldn't hold it herself." She shook her head. "That's not a villain. That's just someone who ran out of better options than cruelty and didn't stop to look for them." She paused. "Doesn't make it okay, but it makes it human. And human things I can put down eventually." Zuri looked at her mother and felt something settle in her chest that had been unsettled since the first cold plate, since the first night she had lain awake in this house and wondered what she was doing wrong. "I'm coming to see you," Zuri said. Beverly's face changed. Just slightly. The practiced composure opening up for a moment to show what was underneath it. "When? 3 weeks. Maybe sooner. Joon-seok? He'll come if you'll have him." Beverly considered this. "Tell him to bring his appetite," she said. "I'm making the full Sunday spread." Zuri laughed. It came out more sudden than expected, and real, the kind of laugh that surfaces when something that has been tightly held is briefly released. "I'll tell him," she said. The months that followed were not a clean resolution. Zuri had long since stopped expecting clean resolutions. They belonged to a version of life she had not been living since she was young enough to still believe in them. What the months were was real, difficult in places, better in others. The kind of life that accumulates through the honest work of the people in it, rather than through the mechanics of plot. She called her mother every Saturday, not because she scheduled it, but because Saturday was when she wanted to, and wanting to was now something she was allowed to act on without anyone managing what that meant. Joon-seok restructured the organization. The reorganization he had been planning moved forward without Myungjin's interference, which meant it moved forward the way he had actually intended it to rather than the version Myungjin had told people to fear. The 4 associates found that repositioning looked very different from what they had been told to expect, and 3 of them acknowledged this directly to Joon-seok, which he received without drama. Song Yun-wook remained at a distance. The window he had been waiting for had closed. He would look for another one. Eventually, Joon-seok was clear-eyed about this and said so, but on a different timeline and with a different set of conditions than what he had been building toward. The estate was quieter, with fewer people in it. Zuri had expected to find the quiet uncomfortable. She had spent so much of her time here, surrounded by people who were technically present and functionally absent, and she had equated population with company. She discovered that the quiet of a house where you are genuinely welcome is a different thing than the quiet of a house where you are being managed. One of them is just silence. The other is actually rest. She started walking in the garden. This was small and specific, and she was aware of its smallness, but she marked it anyway. She had avoided the garden for most of 3 years. It had been one of the spaces she associated with the feeling of being a visitor in her own life, too exposed, too visible from the windows. Now she walked in it in the mornings while Joon-seok was on calls, in the early light, when the estate grounds had the particular quality of a world not yet fully activated for the day. She found a section near the east wall where someone had planted things years ago and then stopped maintaining them, overgrown now, gone to a kind of productive wildness that was not beautiful in the arranged sense, but was honest in the way that things become honest when they're left to do what they actually do. She asked the groundskeeper about it. He said it had been Mrs. Kang Sr.'s section years ago, that she had stopped coming to it when Mr. Kang passed, and it had been left because no one wanted to remove something that had been hers, and eventually the leaving became the default. Zuri looked at the overgrown section and thought about what to do with that information for about 2 weeks. Then she started tending it, not redesigning it, not imposing a plan on it, just clearing what was dead, giving space to what was still alive, finding out what was actually growing underneath the overgrowth. It was methodical work that required no emotional decisions, only attention, and she found that it needed something that responded to care in visible, uncomplicated ways during a period when most things were responding to care in slow, complicated ones. One afternoon she was in the garden when she heard footsteps on the path. She looked up. Hyrin was standing at the edge of the section. She was not living at the estate anymore. The transition to her own property had happened in the 3rd week, clean and without drama. She came to the estate occasionally, when Joon-seok asked her to, for reasons Zuri understood were part of the slow process of whatever they were rebuilding between them. She never came unannounced. She never came in ways that imposed. Today she was looking at the section Zuri was tending. "I didn't know you were coming today," Zuri said. "Joon-seok asked me to bring some documents. I was going to leave them with the staff." She looked at the garden. "This section, yes," Zuri said. "I used to grow herbs here," Hyrin said. "When my husband was alive. He liked certain things in his food that were better fresh." She looked at the plants that were visible now that Zuri had cleared some of the overgrowth. "Some of that is still the original planting. I figured it was yours," Zuri said. Hyrin looked at her. "And you still." "It was being wasted," Zuri said. "Things that are still alive shouldn't be left to die because the situation around them changed." Hyrin was quiet for a moment. "May I show you which ones are the herbs?" she said, "so you don't accidentally clear them." Zuri considered this for exactly as long as it required, which was not very long. "Yes," she said. Hyrin came into the section. She crouched beside the plants with the ease of a woman who had done this many times before, and began pointing out what this one, that one, the one in the corner that was more aggressive than it looked and needed occasional management. Her knowledge was specific in it, and came from a different time than the woman who had ordered cold food and intercepted mail, and Zuri let herself receive that knowledge without requiring it to resolve the contradiction of the person delivering it. People were contradictions. She was a contradiction too. What mattered was what you did with what you knew about yourself. They were in the garden for 40 minutes. Hyrin identified the herbs. Zuri noted which ones she had been about to clear by mistake. They moved around each other in the space with the careful courtesy of two people who do not yet have a natural rhythm, but are no longer afraid to be in the same space long enough to find one. When Hyrin left, she said, "Thank you for keeping it." She meant the garden. She might have meant other things. Zuri said, "Thank you for telling me what was in it." That evening, she told Joon-seok about the afternoon. He was in the kitchen. They were in the kitchen again, which had become the room where the real conversations happened. the informal space that did not require either of them to perform anything. He listened without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. "How do you feel about it?" he said. Not how was it or what happened. How do you feel? The actual interior question. She thought about it. Like something is being rebuilt. That is not the same thing that was damaged, she said. Which is probably the only kind of rebuilding that works. He looked at her. "You're going to be okay with this house," he said. Not as a question. "I already am," she said. He looked at her for a moment with that expression that had too many things in it to name individually. Then he said, "The book." She looked at him. The first edition. From the storage room. He reached behind him on the counter and picked up a book she had not noticed, sitting there. He had found it among the boxes. She had not realized he had taken it specifically. It was smaller than she remembered imagining it. Paperback, not hardcover, worn at the spine in the way of something genuinely old. He set it on the table in front of her. She picked it up. She ran her hand over the cover. 3 years and a storage room, and 8 intercepted letters between her and this small, specific object that her husband had chosen because he had been paying attention. "I'm sorry it took 3 years to get to you," he said. "It got here," she said. She opened the cover. On the title page, in his handwriting, in ink that had dried 3 years ago in a room she had never been in when he wrote it, for Zuri. "Who I notice." She held the book in both hands and looked at those 3 words for a long time. The kitchen was warm, and the evening was doing whatever evenings did in this part of the world in this particular season, and the house around her was quieter than it had ever been since she'd arrived in it, and the quiet felt right kind. The kind that did not press against her, the kind that left room. She closed the book. She looked at her husband across the kitchen table of a house that had tried very hard to be her cage and had not succeeded, because the person who had been intended to make it a cage had miscalculated something essential. Zuri Bennett Kang was a woman who would sit at the edge of the table for a long time, for longer than was fair, for longer than anyone had the right to ask her to, but she had never once, not one single night in 2.5 years, stopped knowing exactly where the center was. She had just been waiting for the table to be ready for her, to sit there. "I want to visit my mother next month," she said. "I'll book the flights," he said. "I want you to come, I know," he said. "I'm coming." "She's making the full Sunday spread." He raised an eyebrow. "You're going to need to eat," she said. "She doesn't make small amounts." Something opened in his face, something young in it, briefly, younger than any version of him she had encountered in 3 years of this house. "I'll eat," he said. She set the book on the table between them. It's outside, the garden was dark, and the security lights were on along the perimeter. And somewhere in the estate, a door closed with the ordinary sound of a house settling into its night. Not the compressed, managed silence she had learned to interpret as warning. Just a house, doing what houses do, holding the people inside it, while they did the imperfect, ongoing, genuinely human work of figuring out what they owed each other. She picked up her tea. He picked up his coffee. They sat in the kitchen together, while the evening came fully down around the estate, and outside the east wall, the garden held its ground in the dark, the overgrown section with its original herbs still in it, tended now, given space, not into something else entirely, but helped to be more fully what it had always been. And the house was quiet, in the way that houses are quiet when the people in them have finally, with great difficulty and real cost, found something true to build on. Nothing was perfect. Everything was real. And for Zuri Bennett Kang, who had sat at the edge of too many tables for too long, real was exactly enough.